sectors. For example, we highly depend on tourism. We highly depend on transport for facilitation, and therefore we're hoping that the CS is going to give a good allocation of money that will be able to finish a lot of infrastructure investments that we're seeing in the country. But also we're going to see a budget that will be extended to KWS and KTB for marketing.
All right, thank you very much. That was Dr. Sami Kwai there, just telling us about his expectations with the budget reading later on. Back to you in studio, Abubakar.
Thank you, Mariam Wacharo, for that. Remember, reporters are up and about here in the city, in the counties, so that you as a viewer have a say in these special broadcasts. We have live pictures now from the National Treasury's headquarters, where the National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani, the CES and the PS are posing for a photo, often described as one of the most powerful poses ever because of what is involved, matters close to the heart, where money is often involved. After that picture, which will become the official portrait for this year's budget presentation, the CES and the PS will head to the National Assembly, Parliament rather, where they will make their presentation of the 2021-2022 budget. Of course, just a reminder that it is only the CS who will make that presentation. Often a routine that is marked with a lot of fanfare. These traditionally and routinely, of course, meticulously observed rules, routines, from pictures to photo arrangements to the presentation later on to how the CS will arrive. Of course, the details to consider this time also is quite the vehicle that the CS will use in that short distance from the National Treasury to the National Assembly, Parliament. Those are live pictures from the National Treasury's headquarters, the National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani walking out of that building, a sign now that he is ready to make that presentation, the highlight of the 2021-2022 financial year budget, making it the last full financial year budget for his boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta, and this being the biggest expenditure that the country will make in its half a century plus years history. 3.66 trillion shillings is the amount the country intends to spend in the next 365 years. A chunk of it, of course, going to the executive, the National Assembly, the Treasury, the Ministry of Health getting an estimate of 121 billion shillings, Ministry of Defense 119.8 billion shillings, water and sanitization and irrigation 77.4 billion shillings. Of importance to note in this unique budget, unique primarily because of the COVID-19 year, is that the government has set aside 15.4 billion shillings for the intervention of COVID-19. This will include the purchase of personal protective equipments, the vaccines, and all other health matters in battling the COVID-19 pandemic. The government has also set aside 26.6 billion shillings post-COVID-19 stimulus package. Remember, the economy has been battered not just locally here, but across the globe. Last year, at such a time when Ukur Yatani was making the first presentation of this budget, we were talking then of a mild recession globally that had its effect equally in Kenya because of the village that the globe has so far become in as far as the economy is concerned. Just a reminder that this is Kenya's biggest budget, 3.66 1.6 trillion shillings, of which the government, through the Ministry of National Treasury and Finance, says it has estimates of 2.1 billion shillings as a revenue collection. This again described by economists, some whom we have hosted here before, some who are here with us today, as an ambitious plan due to the COVID-19 effects on the economy. A stimulus package, of course, will see sectors benefit. Earlier on, we talked to our reporter, Maria Mwacharo, who is in the coastal part of the country. The tourism sector had its pinch by the COVID-19 pandemic following the restriction of movement, the various lockdowns inter-county and also international. I remember Kenya last year closed its airspace, no international flights except for those that were gazetted were making their way to the country. This, of course, having a detrimental effect on the tourist numbers and the number of people visiting the country, both from the African continent and the international market. Those are live pictures, both from Parliament, where Treasury CS Ukur Yatani is heading to. And on your right is Treasury CS Ukur Yatani's motorcade, set to leave the National Treasury to make that short but anxiously waited trip to Parliament, where he will make a presentation of the highlights of the 2021-2022 budget. Of course, all eyes now being on the government's intended increase on some taxes, the removal of the relief, and how to raise that amount of money in that ambitious plan, financial plan of the year 2021-2022. Remember, this is Ukur Yatani's second time that he will be making this presentation in the in Parliament rather. The first and the second uniquely sharing the COVID-19 years. Ukur Yatani made a presentation last year to the country through Parliament of a budget that as of last year was the biggest, 2.91 trillion shillings. That's an increase to 3.66 as per the estimates. Ukuru's headache more or less will be to finance this budget and balance the books, keep the country afloat, and pay the maturing loans. We have all our eyes across the country this afternoon for you. Of course, the reactions of Kenyans whom we earlier on spoke to on this program, talking of how to get money into their pockets, a concern of the basic commodities, of which Ukur Yatani will want a slice of. This through the reintroduction of some taxes that were initially relieved, others just a slight increment, nonetheless will have an effect into the pockets of Kenyans. It's a slight walk, but a heavy walk for those who are guarding that routine motorcade trip from the National Treasury to Parliament. Outside Parliament, and outside the National Treasury's headquarters, where the motorcade carrying the man who the country is waiting for in a bated breath is leaving his office, headed to Parliament, where he's set to make the budget presentation, give the highlights, and how he will finance that budget. Of course, the 47 million Kenyans will bear the brunt of any increment, and that man today will justify why he will have to increase some taxes. Just a reminder that this is Kenya's biggest budget yet, signaling the country's everly increasing economy, an increase in deficit as well, an increase in an ambitious revenue collection estimate of slightly above 2 trillion shillings. This is Ukur Yatani's second time as the CS for Treasury to make this presentation. An underlying factor for him for this job is that he has been making these presentations first last year. He made this presentation first last year during the COVID-19 pandemic. This year also, the economy is slowly regaining and recovering from the punctures of COVID-19 pandemic that has had effect not just on the markets, but on Kenyans and the economy of the country. Members of Parliament, more so the committee concerned with the budget preparations, will wait for him there, as you see the chairman of that committee being Kanini Kega, Mheshimiwa. Ukur Yatani is making that short distance trip routine from the National Treasury to Parliament, as members of Parliament wait for him there. Of course, from there he will be received, head to the Parliament to make that presentation, highlighting the expenditure of the country in what is the biggest expenditure yet of 3.66 trillion shillings. Just a reminder of the guests with me in studio. Hilary Onami is the head of public policy at the Institution of Certified Public Accountants. Professor Gershon Ikera is an economist. This Prof signals that it is all done and dusted. The man who the country will wait for to know how to get money is heading to where he is supposed to make that presentation. Prof.
Yes, I think these are annual issues which I think people look forward to, basically to know, although now these days actually they know quite a bit of the budget even before it is presented, because of the need to be open. Previously, you were didn't know what was contained in the budget. But this is now a new thing for the last almost 10 years or more, where the various views of the people, business people, academics, present their views, and they are captured to some extent. And all this is done, and the important committees in relevant ministries give their views. So the budget is fairly well known, not the kind of secrecy that was there before, where the price in bread or petrol was announced and it captured the mood of the day.
All right.
So, but it is important, and Kenya as a democracy must be able to show these kind of things, to inculcate respect and the patriotic feelings from the wananchi. And that's why the rule of law and doing things according to the constitution obviously has become very important. And that's why we hope that many of the things that people are listening can be taken up and be followed to see how further adjustment or tinkering with the budget as we go can be utilized.
All right, Prof, I understand we also have Ali Khan Sachu with us. Ali Khan, good afternoon, and thank you for your time. Let me get your initial reaction first to what is Kenya's biggest expenditure plan at 3.66 trillion shillings. All right, it seems as though we have a problem with Ali Khan Sachu's connection. Nonetheless, we'll get back to him. Hillary, just looking at those pictures, there is a CS making his way to Parliament. The CS is, of course, under the executive arm of the government. We have members of Parliament which represent the another arm of the government, which is the legislature. But what is often their role in this budget-making process?
I've got the sound on.
Thank you so much. I think the Constitution 2010 gave Parliament the biggest role in the budget-making process because actually they are the approver of budget, while the executive develops the budget and involves Mwananchi through the public participation forums that they had. And an interesting Ukur Yatani term, they actually invited members of public to give them tips or that they can use, he can use to develop this year's budget. That was a quite brilliant move from Yatani, and we wait to see whether Mwananchi's views or tips were considered. As Prof was saying, it's an herald. It's a new form of doing business, which is quite welcome. Initially, you will wait for the finance bill until September, but starting last year, this year actually, the finance bill has come before June. So it's discussed and approved before end of June. So at starting...
And Hillary, you say Parliament has the biggest role.
Yes.
Does it seem as though it has the biggest role?
Well, in all fairness, it has, seeming it's a totally different question, but I think what the Constitution and the law provides for, it has the biggest role, and that's why CS is heading to Parliament. If it did no say, then we will not be seeing this much. But it's heading to Parliament, where the Parliament now will approve his budget, without which he will not, spend. So in all fairness, I think Parliament still has the pass, but increasingly the critics have it that, they have become complacent, and the executive has had its way even in Parliament, and we are not seeing them. Though I was watching some interview earlier on that member of Parliament was saying that they were about to stage a coup today if the CS had not given in to the demands for CDF. So actually, until yesterday,
the late disbursement of the constituency development fund.
Yeah.
Let me get Professor's thought on the same, Prof.
First of all,
Hillary says Parliament has the biggest role. But
it has previously the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance were the people who designed almost everything, came and presented it, and then the MPs made their comments. Now, the change in this actually made the Parliament very, very key. They can amend a lot of allocations. They can now amend a lot of allocations on various activities. So the chairman here of Parliament committee, which handles the budget, is now almost like the Minister for Finance to a large extent. There are many people who are not very comfortable with that, although it brought transparency and technically people's participation through their representatives. There was a fear that the issue of running the economy could be politicized. That many politicians seem to argue mainly for their counties, their constituency, and there were many economists who are not very comfortable that they can be impartial enough and objective in determining the allocation. And that fear still continues to a large extent, especially if you have a very expanded government structure.
All right, Prof, we have the live pictures of the National Treasury CS now on air, posing for a photo with the lawmakers as well. If Kenya was in the microeconomics, a household, Prof, what kind of a man would Yatani be today?
He would be like the father in a household where sons and daughters and the wives or the wife bring the resources, and he is technically given the role of how the cake should be cut, which has already been discussed by the rest of the family. So he's, to some extent, rubber stamping what has already been done by the members of the family.
Even though the bulk of the responsibility of how to fit those finances will trickle down to him, is it?
Yes.
Yes.
Hillary.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. I think I agree with the Prof's analogy. You know, Ukur is like the father here. He has to look at how the family is going to feed, you know, how the family is going to clothe and get the basic services. And every eye is on him today, you know, just like the father will be. And hence the owners are really great on him today. I don't want to be in his shoes today.
All right, Prof, looking at debt, and we have talked about that quite for some time on this special program today. Looking at Kenya's structure of debt, Prof, we borrow from multilateral, bilateral, and commercial. If you compare the behavior of Kenya's borrowing in the last 10 years, it has relatively remained the same on multilateral, quite an increase in bilateral by 3%, but there has been a huge increase on commercial borrowing from 4% to 34% as of last year, Prof. What partly explains that?
It's because the borrowing from multinational institutions is limited. You are given some of the money depending on your contribution in IMF or World Bank bodies. So that determines your allocation or what you can borrow. And we experienced it when we want to negotiate in the World Bank team, and we were told this time we were could only borrow about $200 million, which was not really enough for what we wanted to do, renovating and expanding Jomo Kenyatta Airport, doing some work on Mombasa Road. So it became very clear you cannot depend on the money that comes from multilateral institutions. It is cheap. Sometimes the interest rates could be 1% or less. So it is preferred, and they use that proportion also to influence policy making and other activities within the countries that are giving money. So the leeway that you had before was reduced. So that's how now the government went into other sources, China, Exim Bank, other institutions.
And these are commercial loans that the government is borrowing.
They are commercial loans. But if you have an urgent thing, like you want to have 600 kilometers of SGR to open up the economy in Kenya, the transport system, you cannot say that because I can't get cheap, I will stop there. Yeah? You know, mweko kubunjika, you know, you don't stop.
All right, Prof, I've heard your point. Let me bring in Hillary. Hillary, if the government is eyeing commercial loans, as the increase we have seen in percentages, and it has its citizens, you and me, who also want commercial loans from banks and even these international companies, is there often a problem there?
Well, definitely the problem will be on the terms of payment because the commercial loans period of repayment becomes short and hence a bit expensive. It's just the same way you'll go in and look for a loan and you'll be given either a term of 4 years, 5 years to repay. That in itself does not allow for the investments, the development investments that will have been essentially be funded through debt, recoup back, and the benefits be seen in the economy. So I think longer term and concessional term loans are preferable because essentially the economic benefits that could be intended from the development projects that are being funded to have been regained. So we will have seen quite a substantive ripple effect that the development projects have created, so that we're able to repay the loans in the future, as opposed to short-term commercial loans that require us to pay in the next few years that the development projects do not have recouped.
Yes. And Hilary, as we talk of the repayment of loans, there are some that are maturing this year, hence the government in its own budget factoring in the repayment of those loans.
Yes.
What often happens to, for instance, a country that does not meet those repayment obligations within the specified time?
Well, they are blacklisted, and you've seen either the Moody's ranking, your ranking becomes bad, hence you cannot borrow. It's like being listed in CRB, so you will not be able to borrow going into the future. And basically, at some point, we have seen the owners of the debts coming to seize some of the property that was used to fund that debt used to fund. So I think we have seen China going into Malawi and into other there's a country they went and seized the port. I think that's the risks that portend failure to meet the obligations. And that's why public debt is the first charge and the consolidated fund, so that before you spend money into recurrent expenditure and other usages, public debt is picked from the funds that you collect.
All right, Prof, as you respond to the question of debt and on the debt crisis, Prof, it's not something new that may happen, is it? It happened, I believe, in Greece in 2015 when they defaulted on the loan payment.
Yes, the international community took very serious action. Greece and a rather radical socialist-leaning leader, and who was not obeying with the international liquidity conditions. Because IMF and World Bank are stabilizers of the global monetary system. They know that if countries are left on their own, they can overdo something and this will destabilize the whole economy. So when Greece failed to comply, they put very strict conditionalities. They could not even, you could not withdraw more than $60 or in your bank. Very micromanaging of the borrowing of the country. They had to surrender within less than 2 weeks.
And that often hurts the people, isn't it, Prof?
Yeah. Everybody. It hurts everybody. The seriousness of failing to comply with the conditions of repayment they are very serious, because the international community fears that all the lenders, private sector, and the international institutions will stop lending because of the likely crisis in the global economy. So that's why they take serious measures to ensure that you abide by that. Now, once you borrow this kind of money, also your policy making to some extent constrained. You can be told, don't do this, don't invest in this, reduce this, you should cut down your employment. So many governments fear that kind of thing, because it restrains you very strictly on what you can do, and you root respect within the country and everywhere.
Yeah.
And given, Prof, that when we give the example of Greece, it was the IMF that was giving these conditions, and that similar IMF gave Kenya conditions, among them a raft of measures that the country was to put in place, inclusive of structural reform agenda within the first phase of the program to address policy needs and key institutions as well. For those who draw a comparison of that debt crisis and what Hilary pointed to in Malawi, are we that bad, or are those exaggerations, Prof, You are an economist of high standing.
No, Kenya economy has never really and a very major debt issue because they have listed all the debt repayment every month so that they make a provision for the repayment quite early in advance. If they find that the money is not enough, that from their sources, they make other arrangements to ensure that it's paid or negotiate for rescheduling of the debt. And that rescheduling is a very tough meeting for developing countries. You are really made to feel that you're almost a beggar. So many countries don't want that. And so that's why like now Kenya is trying to reschedule some of the loans because it does not fail to pay on the date of the repayment, the scheduled repayment. So it asks for extension of the period, obviously under some conditions, in order for them to fail, not to fail to pay on time. It's a very serious crisis when a country fails. It's like you are declared bankrupt internationally. And no international bank, either private or government or multinational, will be able to deal with you as a country.
Hilary, the International Monetary Fund is a lender to Kenya and to many other countries, both developing and developed countries. Can it dictate to countries of how the money they are lending should be used?
Well, as it says, he who
caused the piper or something.
Yeah, you become you become liable to the one who has given you the funds, so to speak. And that's the case that even IMF, because like they come in with the conditionalities that for you to get this kind of money, these are conditions. You either take it or leave it. So they have all the all the rights, and if it were not so, you will not have gone to them for funding, so to speak. So yeah,
something like taking over the property. In my view, that is exaggerated quite a bit. Because if you take Mombasa Port or Djibouti Port or something, how do you take it? Something this way?
And Prof, whereas the taking over, as you say, might be exaggerated, the IMF has been very strict on the demands for structural reforms in the Kenya Airways, the Kenya Airports Authority, Kenya Railways Corporation, and Kenya Power, leading parastatals owned by the government.
They have a lot of say in that, and that's why many people want to avoid that. And that's why some countries have been forced to go into more expensive sources because they don't want to abide with the conditions which tie their hands. Like Kenya Airways is a very critical company in Kenya. So if you are forced to ground it or something, obviously it will be a terrible thing. So these are all things that come into play into what the country can do and how they can negotiate with the global lenders. The global lenders act as a group, so that no country can refuse what they are saying. We can ignore the advice. But if you get other sources of financing, if you get China or something, it may be more expensive. And you have to calculate whether it's better to have the project with an expensive source or have nothing, and what are the implications.
But sometimes, Abdul, I think it's good to have those checks and balances because more often than not, you really cannot trace the some of the funds that have come in from the donors to the development projects. You remember we were at pains to explain where the Eurobond 1 or Eurobond 2 went to, and that's where the Kamoror and Aror dams, Saga, Aros and stuff like that. We could not trace to the shilling where the debt money went to, and that has been our challenge. And some of these conditionalities sometimes the donor give are towards that specific, that we gave you applied for this loan to go into this project. We want to see that money go to that project. And some, as Prof is saying, government sometimes feel twisted to utilize that funds to settle some emergency here and there.
All right.
And such.
All right, Hilary and Prof, stay with us from checks and balances. Let's get to Parliament, where the man of the day, Ukur Yatani, will be making the budget presentations, the highlight and the revenue collection measures in what is Kenya's largest budget so far. Let's cross over there and listen into that.
Certificates of decrease, taxation, and orders against the government to be paid in the year 2017. In spite of the fact that the Principal Secretary for Defense saw an affidavit that the ministry had factored the decretal amounts in the 2017-2018 budget to settle the compensation, the orders remain unheeded several years later. They are therefore worried that since most of their colleagues are senior citizens, aged above 65 years, and no capacity to fend for themselves, any further delay to be compensated will worsen their deteriorating conditions of life. Honourable members, the petitioners are therefore praying that the National Assembly allocate to the Ministry of Defence such funds necessary in the 2021-2022 financial year for compensation and settlement of decretal debts and the interest accrued thereof to the ex-Kenya Air Force officers who were dismissed in 1982. Honourable members, having determined that the matters raised by the petitioners are well within the authority of this House, I order that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 227, the petition be committed to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. The committee is required to consider the petition and report its findings to the House and the petitioners in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 227, subsection 2. The committee may also consider proposing necessary adjustments to the 2021-2022 budget for the relevant votes so as to accommodate the prayers of the petitioners should they find them being capable of being accommodated. I thank you, honourable members. Honourable members, in view of the business ahead, I will dispense with the requirement to allow members to comment on that petition. So the petition will just start committed to the Committee on Budget. Let's proceed.
2021, the afternoon sitting. Number one, the reports on the Auditor General and financial statement for the Kenya Veterinary Vaccines Production Institute for the year ended 30th of June, 2015, 2017, and 2018, and the certificates therein. Number two, the reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect to the following institutions for the year ended 30th of June 2020, and the certificates therein. The State Department for Youth Affairs, the Public Service Commission, the State Department for Development of the Arid and Semi-Arid Lands, ASALS, the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Board, Development Revenue Statements from the National Treasury, Revenue Statements of the Government Investment and Public Enterprises from the National Treasury, the East Africa Tourist Visa Collection Account from the National Treasury, the Government Clearing Agency Funds, the National Exchequer Account from the National Treasury, Office of the Controller of Budget Mortgage Fund, Stores and Services Fund from the State Department of Public Works, Consolidated Fund Services, Pension and Gratuities from the National Treasury, Mechanical and Transport Fund from the National Youth Service, and the State Department for Public Works. Lastly, number three, the County Government Budget Implementation Review Report for the first 9 months of the financial year 2020-2021. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, questions and statements.
First segment questions. The first question is by the member for Kajiado North, the Honorable Joseph Manje.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Speaker. My question is to the CS ICT Innovation and Youth. The first part, could the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the status of implementation of the Kenya National Addressing System and the Communication Authority, which involves physical and electronic naming and numbering of buildings? And 2, what urgent measures is the ministry taking to ensure that institutionalization of the national addressing system is expedited? Thank you, Chair. Speaker.
The question will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Communication, Information and Innovation. Question by the member for Stare, the Honorable Charles Jagua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question 182 of 2021, directed to the Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination of National Government. Could the Cabinet Secretary provide a status report on the investigations into an accident that occurred on 5th May 2021 near Pangani Girls High?
Well, those are live pictures from Parliament, where the House business has kicked off. Remember, members of Parliament as of now are asking questions to relevant cabinet secretaries, questions perhaps tailored to the areas they represent. Of course, our eyes are there primarily and so because of the national budget presentation by National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani. We will get back there once Ukur Yatani will start to address and then make that presentation and the highlight of the 2021-2022 budget. Let's get back to our discussion. Just a reminder of our guest, Hilary Onami is the head of public policy at the Institution of Certified Public Accountants. Professor has been with us from mid-morning. Prof, we have talked of debt, reservicing that debt because it is a contractual obligation that a country or a lender expects you to pay at the agreed specified time. We have talked of failures to do that. But Prof, when Kenyans hear that the government is borrowing, be it because of addressing urgent needs of the country or otherwise, there is the notion that we are over borrowing. Are we?
Not necessarily. You know, as I said, the needs are usually way ahead of the available means, even for a family. So, if you want to move on, you have 2 cows or 2 camels, and you want to have a bigger herd, you may be able to borrow so that you can implement what your desire is. Mm-hmm. So, many institutions and individuals, sometimes their needs, their desires and all that are way to a large extent ahead of where they are. And indeed that is what makes one grow as a family, what makes a government grow, that you want to have a SNGR, you want to have the old meter and gauge refurbished. Uh-huh. Now all those are things that and you cannot finance it immediately with the resources you have. So that's when you then go into the market to borrow or any lending available market, so that you can do it and then pay it with the income that you are earning from that activity. So you have to do the calculations. Mm-hmm. What will be the earnings from the project that I'm financing? How much will it be able to meet the payments? Now the project could be very strategic. Mm-hmm. Very strategic, like SNGR or something else. So you see that sometimes you have to close your eyes and borrow from an expensive source, because this is something major, either in terms of defense, national defense, or national infrastructure. So That is why before we condemn borrowing, we need to really interrogate what it is and all those other facts. And the parliament is able to sometimes actually get information. How will you pay this? How will you do this? So that you don't make a reckless move.
All right, Prof, we have quite exhausted on the debate of borrowing, whether it is a necessary evil or otherwise. Let's get to another issue that I want us to discuss, which is the gap between the rich and the rest in this country. What in economics you will term as inequality, Prof. That according to the the charity organization Oxfam, 1% of Kenyans own as much wealth as the bottom 99%. Hillary, at best that is indicative of a very unequal society, is it?
You're very right, Abdul. And it's not just a Kenyan phenomenon. It's actually a world over phenomenon, because the world is owned by very few rich people. In Kenya, I think last year, he was saying that people with balances of 100,000 in Kenya and above were
just a small proportion.
Yeah, there were very few. I think less than 1,000 actually, so to speak, at some point. So it's quite an indicative figure that the gap between the rich and the poor is big, but the inequalities is caused by quite a number of parameters that, as they say, and the Constitution was categorical on this, that one of the principles of public finance will be to enhance and reduce that inequality, so that both development-wise and the different demographics, that gap is reduced. So it's a constitution. The Constitution identified it as a key issue that will enable economy to thrive when various people have some basic, and Article 43 of the Constitution speaks to that very fact, that you're able to access to health, access to water, access to the basic amenity, constitutional human fundamental rights that every Kenyan is entitled to. As to how we can achieve that is a discussion we can have now.
Yes.
All right, Prof, before I let you weigh on that, and I want to ask you of the Robin Hood economics, and if that will work, of gently taxing more some, gently stealing, for the lack of a better word, from some for equal distribution. But I understand we need to get back to Parliament. Let's cross over there and listen in.
The chairperson, the vice chairperson are absent, not desiring to be present on this momentous day. I don't know how can they be absent? How can the chairperson be absent on a day like today? Surely, maybe but they should have come here. The house was sitting yesterday, so they cannot be said to be on the way from their villages. The member who is raising his hand up there, would you want to speak on behalf of the chairperson, or on behalf of the vice chair, or on your own behalf? Is that Honorable Osman? What? Okay. Very well, very well. Your concerns are noted, and the leader majority will convey that message, but let them bring the statement on Tuesday. It has taken too long. I can see an intervention from the member for Uriri. Honorable Nyamita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the 13th of May, I did ask a question directed to the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations. My question had to do with compensation of one of their ex-members of the Kenya Defence Forces who had not been compensated for now over 25 years. And Mr. Speaker, you directed that question, and the chair then, I think Honorable Ksh3.66trillion, agreed to bring feedback to this House in 2 weeks. We are heading towards the end of June, and we have not heard from them. They have not come back to this House to even come and seek for additional time, so that they probably fast track this, because the people on whose behalf I was petitioning are waiting for this feedback.
You've had the petition which you have just said. Perhaps it could be addressed in that petition, is it?
It could be covered also, because mine was specific and I gave out all the details. So if they could address us, probably they
although the question was really not directed to the chairman, it was directed to the minister, the cabinet secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I was indeed very glad with that petition to the Budget and Appropriation Committee, because we have, a long list of ex-army officers claims by the Honorable Nyamita. Mr. Speaker, it's also good to note that these cases, because they all ended up being in court, from the court martial, the High Court, and High Court actually cleared those officers, awarded them those these cases, because they all ended up being in court, from the court martial to the High Court, and High Court actually cleared those officers, awarded them those damages. But when you inquire from the government, especially from the Ministry of Defense, and specifically from the Attorney General Office, they say there is a pending appeal. Government had appealed for such judgment, and there are so many, and it actually colossal sum of money, a lot of money, that were awarded to those ex-officers, ex-army officers. So now going to the Budget Committee, it is the Budget Committee that has got powers in this House to do appropriation. So the case of the Honorable Nyamita, I'm very sure it will be covered there, where the Budget Committee will look into the judgment of the High Court and whether there is any live appeal in the Court of Appeal on the same matter, and then they will make an informed decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Maybe the Honorable Nyamita will can also pursue with the Budget and Appropriations Committee. But certainly, and the Honorable Nyamita say that since he raised the question on the 13th of May, it is now towards the end of June. But certainly, 10th of June cannot be towards the end. It is not towards Honorable Nyamita. 10th of June cannot be towards the end of June. But nevertheless, your concern is noted. Yes, Honorable Nyamita.
Mr. Speaker, whereas I appreciate the feedback from the Chair of Defense and Foreign Relations, I think it would be justice if the committee at least looked into the matter instead of generalizing and saying that I think, in this House, the Chair cannot come and say, I think that petition, when we have, they are seized of that very question that I asked. They need to find out the details. If then it requires the intervention of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Mr. Speaker, where I also sit, then he will bring it. But to just dismiss it without even having the benefit of looking at it,
I think we might be directing it to the wrong committee, because mine was not exactly as a petition that you had earlier raised. So I just want to urge that probably they look into it, they find out facts, because it is them who can be able to tell us whether the respective department has lodged an appeal. Instead of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, we will not be in a position to go and check whether, so that is the work of the committee, then they can direct it to.
You can get that. Honorable Katolo Mitito, can you bring on Thursday a specific response as to whether or not, in respect to the question raised by the Honorable Nyamita, whether the state did appeal, and if they did, the status of the appeal for the comfort of the honorable member.
All right, those are live pictures from Parliament, where the House is conducting its business, part of the unique nature of this budget presentation initially. And in other years, you will see Treasury CS from the National Treasury's headquarters head to Parliament, get to the House. The Speaker, both the Speakers of the House will do the introduction. Then he would address and make that presentation. But it seems as though we will have to wait a little bit before we hear from the man of the day, who is set to make Kenya's largest expenditure plan at 3.66 trillion. Nonetheless, let's get back to our discussion. Prof, before the break, I was hinting of a Robin Hood moment, a Robin Hood tax. Your thoughts, Prof?
Again, the whole issue of inequality obviously exists in many countries. Mm-hmm. In Kenya, we've been struggling with it. At the time, Moi completed his terms, about 56% of the Kenyans were living below poverty line. Yes, sorry. Were living below poverty line. Mm-hmm. And as of now, I think about below 40% is still living below poverty line. Mm-hmm. Now, if it is that 5 or that 8 which is still below poverty line, it is a big number. Mm-hmm. But it's significant to see where it has come from, 56 to that 5 or that 8. Because sometimes, we talk as if nothing is happening on that front of reducing poverty and inequality. Now, there are two issues that a budget like this one should try to check. Mm-hmm. What are the causes of poverty and inequality, and how can it be addressed? Mm-hmm. There are things which are national, others which are policy, and others which are individual. So that somebody who is employed becomes a drunkard, becomes a drug addict, it becomes difficult for him to be able to improve himself. Uh-huh. Even if he has gone to the university and we have seen PhD people who have become poor because they can't manage their affairs. Now, such cases cannot be helped by the government. It must be family or a counselor or somebody who can intervene to see what can happen. Mm-hmm. The government things can come with the policies. And I want to touch one, the Kibaki compulsory education, free primary education. And I said earlier on that in my view, it is the most equalizing policy undertaken in Kenya in a post-independence period. Because empowering people through education, these 1 million kids who went to school, some of them who would never have had a chance. Mm-hmm. Today they compete with the children of ministers, professors, and what have you, because they went and got their degrees, and they are now uplifting even their own families. So government can come up with some interventions, like education, or kazi kwa vijana, or another national project which you given a chance. Those who use that chance properly, tuseme kama kazi kwa vijana, there are those people who will use it, save some money, start a kiosk, and 10 years from there you will be a millionaire with his own business. So there are things government cannot be able to, can help. Mm-hmm. But the nature of the family, the nature of the individual, especially the issue of people who have gotten lost through over drinking and smoking substances, it becomes a case which cannot be helped, and it affects the children and the wives and what have you. So, therefore, that is why it is such a difficult issue to eradicate poverty completely, and that's even why the Bible says there will be poor with us all the time.
All right, let me bring in.
But the government can do some action and change a bigger picture, like China. China has
and Prof,
been,
as you say, it also trickles down to the individual. There is that individual aspect
yes,
as well in this.
You know, when you are educated, you benefit from that education, and it is one of the best, most important empowerment. That individual will be changed, but some will not be changed because they have other problems.
All right, Hilary, we are talking of taxes, and often we see either the increment or the relief in such unique times as was last year. But there's often the debate of fair share, and I'm sure this is an argument you have come across. We are talking of inequality, the gap between the rich and the rest. But are the rich paying their fair share? Leave off the 16% that we are supposed to pay as all Kenyans, but are they paying their fair share for the prosperity of the economy?
Well, we have adopted a progressive kind of taxation model in the country where the different tax rates will apply to, as is a graduated scale of sort. That, you know, we have right from the exempted category of 0 to, you know, right now it's about 16 pre-COVID. Okay, during COVID, it was extended to 24,000. Those who are earning within that range, they will pay, you know, no payee. Then those that are earning, and you know, the scale actually changed, and up to now 30%. You know, 30% is almost equivalent to what corporations pay as a corporation tax. To me, that graduated scale it's a bit, you know, equalizing, so that those that are earning less are paying less, and those that are adding more are paying more. But also, what we need to really focus on, because we have not employed all the factors of production as a country, so that the economy can be more efficient and productive. I think there's a lot of idle land. You know, one critical factor of production. There's a lot of you know, the labor. Most investors say our labor is quite expensive. Again, arising from the benefits that education for all have brought. Then basically most of our populace are quite educated, and since they expect more in terms of labor. So
Hilary, I asked you the question on fair share.
Yes.
Because there is the debate of it shouldn't be an enforced move.
Yes.
That there should be a moral obligation to a person who makes billions of shillings to pay a little bit more than what they will ordinarily pay as per the percentage counting. It's a moral argument. It doesn't always happen. It's too ideal, is it, Prof?
You know, that one automatically comes because Bill Gates pays a lot. Alibaba pays a lot automatically, apart even from their donations. So in most of the countries' tax structures, the millionaires and billionaires pay a lot of money, and they also come in different ways. Like if you look at Mwangi of Equity and the gains that it takes, who in the coming generation will be people holding very, very senior positions. So they go beyond the normal tax rates that are fixed. So, but I think, so what the progressive, that is what I think my friend has mentioned, the progressive tax. That is recommended in most of the economies. But it is not enough. You can never equalize people, because some people, you get 2 PhDs and they are in motivation to work. The incentive to work is very different. So the individual characteristics of a person and the family plays a big part. And this is why we were saying earlier on, government could actually set maybe county committees which can go counseling the youth and the parents of even how to use the resources they have. Instead of coming here and becoming a shokora, you can actually go to a piece of land where your father has, and from there anything is possible.
But a wealth tax is also something in the offing. I think KRA has been exploring that we introduce some form of wealth tax, that if you have some threshold of wealth, some commensurate tax is posted upon you. It's something in the offing, and it can come out anytime sooner. I've had such conversations that we introduce a wealth tax that will try to minimize that wealth disparity and wealth gap.
But you must always make sure that you don't create disincentives to individuals. Private sector, they are very sensitive on extra taxation. And by trying to, you may actually make the country unable to attract investors. And that would be a major loss, because those kind of additional things make the place rather attractive.
All right, Prof, you are an economist of high standing, and I will repeat this. Is there a need to look probably at the redefinition of what really wealth is? And we were off air chit-chatting earlier on. I was telling you, for instance, where I come from, the millionaires probably may not look like some, because they have a herd of camels, and one camel goes for 60,000 shillings, and that person has in the ranges of 100 or 150. That person, monetary-wise, could classically be defined as a millionaire, but the lifestyle of that person is not.
You cannot quantify that to be able to bring him in the tax rates that we are talking about in the formal ones. But I was saying the government can take, like now, if you went to your area, your village, or you can actually inform those people that they can transform their wealth from animals alone, which can enjoy just in 1 year of drought. So that they build real estate in Nairobi, in Mombasa, or even in Garissa or wherever. They need to be informed, or their children, as they go through schools, they can actually come and tell the father or their mom, we can actually diversify our assets. So that's some of the benefits from education and exposure.
All right, Hilary, your thoughts as well on the same?
Well, I agree with Prof in that sense, but and this is something that it has been the discussion, that increasingly the people who want to hide from the taxman are hiding their wealth in the form of cattle, in form of jewelry, in form of such related, and the taxman is really aware of this. I can tell you for a fact, and will be looking at some of the incentives to closely monitor transactions that related to such forms of wealth. And actually, even in the finance bill this year, you'll see some specific excise duty towards jewelry, towards such kinds of forms of wealth that increasingly people that are not considered wealthy, as you say, have enough stocks of cattle, enough stocks of camel and other related entities that are not in the formal circulation. For
obviously, the caveat there is that you need to avoid getting to things that could be culturally and politically very sensitive to implement. And that is why in general education and the urbanization will slowly change these things. If you try to force this at this stage, you could create a major crisis, politically and socially and culturally in many parts of the country.
All right, Prof. and Hillary, earlier on we had Kenyans from the 47 counties across this country give their thoughts, opinions, and their expectations. We talked of money, as Kenyans said, not being in their pocket. Let's talk of unemployment, Prof. If this is a country that has a huge population of youth, which will technically be defined as a youthful country, will it be fair to say that this is a youthful, unemployed country then?
Sure. We are very big part of this youthful, they are not employed. And part of it is because of the market is not reaching them. Most of it also is because of lack of skills. Mm-hmm. And that's why education is actually the most important thing to focus in changing the structure of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So, so that is there, but you know, right now and also there is no advisory committees, whether by NGOs, telling people if you are further as an acre here in Meru, where we come from, you don't have to come and suffer here in Nairobi with no rent or income or anything, because you just need to plant something there and you will be supporting yourself and supporting your children and even other relatives.
But Hillary, is it not the case that at bare minimum, someone who from the onset has been told that education is the key to success would either want a job as a show of success once they are done with their education cycle, or a government that is creating that job?
True, that's the expectation, and actually lately you have seen people with master's degrees either raising placards saying that I'm an employer, I'm looking for a job, and there are quite many PhDs, even doing very informal work. As the society has said, it's expected that once you've gone through the school, and hence you'll get to formal and white collar kind of jobs. But I think that's why the government came up with the deliberate action on even the CBC, that our education system is geared towards developing competencies, that once you get out of school, you are able to create employment, and rather than seeking employment. And I think that policy, that transformational nature of education. And I think there's someone, I don't know if you could have seen it, there's a clips that are saying the difference between the children in China or in Korea or in Japan vis-a-vis children in Kenya. That whilst the children there are taught directly into, creating toys, creating productive, being productive, as we are being pumped to passing exams. And I think that transformational policy is needed, so that our education then will not be geared towards looking for employment, but generating employment.
All right, Hillary and Prof, stay with us. I see you have live pictures from Parliament, where Treasury CS Ukur Yatani has started addressing the Parliament, presenting the 2021-2022 budget. Let's listen to the man of the day.
Of the Public Finance Management Act, understanding order number 241 of the National Assembly. I do this in performing my fiduciary duty to Kenyans. Before I proceed with the rest of my statement, Mr. Speaker, allow me to state that during the preparation of this budget, I had very fruitful engagements with diverse stakeholders and received valuable feedback. The breadth of the stakeholders spanned from the government ministries, departments and agencies, county government, committees of this House, development partners, private sector, and Kenyans from all walks of life. I extend my sincere gratitude to them for their views and useful suggestions which inform the priorities of this budget. Mr. Speaker, pressing concerns raised by Kenyans during the consultation process revolved around the impact of COVID-19 and its containment measures. Kenyans were concerned about the high cost of COVID-19 treatment and availability of vaccines, in addition to food security, high cost of living, and employment levels among the youth. In addition, Kenyans raised concerns about the general levels of poverty and inequality, as well as increased public debt. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I wish to assure Kenyans that these concerns have been considered, and I will be elaborating specific interventions later in this statement. Mr. Speaker, as you recall, following the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in March last year, the government instituted containment measures to curb the spread of the virus and save lives. To cushion Kenyans and businesses, the government rolled out specific fiscal interventions, including reduction of pay-as-you-earn and corporate tax from 30 to 25%, value-added tax from 16 to 14%, and turnover tax from 3 to 1%. The government also offered 100% tax relief to Kenyans earning below Kenya shilling 24,000 per month. In addition, the government enhanced cash transfer allocations to the vulnerable segment of the society, including the emerging urban vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the government further implemented various monetary policy measures to enhance access to credit by the private sector. These included reduction of the central bank rate from 8.25 to 7%, and lowering of the cash reserve ratio from 5.2 to 4.2%, thereby injecting an additional cash shilling 35 billion to the money market. Further, during this period, commercial banks were allowed flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and provisioning. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic activities in the country, the government implemented a comprehensive economic stimulus program targeting activities in infrastructure, education, health, business liquidity, agriculture and food security, tourism, manufacturing, environment, water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, in spite of these interventions, a lot remains to be done in order to deal with the challenges of unemployment among our youth, as well as high poverty and income inequality levels that have been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our rallying call in this year's budget is therefore job creation through continued and sustained economic growth. To strengthen this position, we shall implement comprehensive economic recovery strategy that will expand economic activities and address these challenges. Mr. Speaker, the private sector remains key to employment creation and poverty reduction in the country. In order to expand the scope and pace of policy interventions and enhance access to credit by businesses, the government established the Credit Guarantee Scheme to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the plight of the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, remains a key concern for our government. In order to cushion this particular group, the government will enhance cash transfer allocations and institute other targeted interventions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered one of the worst health and economic crises of our time. The pandemic overstretched our health systems, and in line with the advisory of the World Health Organization, the government implemented appropriate interventions to save lives. The response has undoubtedly strengthened our healthcare system through provisioning of necessary medical supplies, installation of modern equipment, and deployment of more health personnel. In addition, in March 2021, the government launched the National COVID-19 Vaccination Program, initially targeting the frontline workers and other highly vulnerable groups. As at end of May 2021, about 1 million persons had received the first vaccine dose. In order to facilitate further rollout of vaccines to create herd immunity, we propose to allocate Kenya shilling 14.3 billion in the financial 2021-22. This is in addition to Kenya shilling 7.6 billion appropriated in the current budget. Mr. Speaker, to enhance access to affordable medical and equipment for management of COVID-19 and chronic diseases, I will later in this statement be proposing tax relief measures on the various pharmaceutical products and medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, the containment measures instituted by the government to stem the spread of the virus and save lives adversely affected economic activities and revenue performance. To stimulate economic activities and enhance government's ability to respond, we prioritized health and social expenditures and formulated an economic recovery strategy program that targeted, first, enhancing our ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, reducing debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation with a view to stabilizing debt to GDP ratio over the medium term. Third, implementing targeted policy, legal and institutional reforms, while at the same time addressing vulnerabilities in the state-owned enterprises worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And fourth, strengthening the monetary policy framework and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we plan to reduce the level of fiscal deficit from 8.7% of GDP in the current budget to 7.5% of GDP in the financial 2021-22, and further to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2024-25. This will be a 5.1% reduction in fiscal deficit over the next 4 years, thereby slowing the annual growth of debt. Upon our request, this economic recovery program is supported by multilateral and bilateral development partners, with the International Monetary Fund providing financial resources amounting to US dollars 2.34 billion over the next 3 years. Further, Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 countries extended support to developing countries by offering debt service suspension under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative framework. The fiscal space created under this initiative is to increase social, health, and economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya has benefited from this initiative through expansion of health and social services. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Kenya welcomes the initiatives under the recent French-African Summit that agreed to, among others, increase funding through the IMF special drawing rights to African states to support economic recovery, extension of the G20 debt service suspension, and facilitate the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has been prepared against a backdrop of projected global economic recovery. This is despite the emergence of COVID-19 variant, occasioning reintroduction of containment measures to further stem spread of the virus. The projected recovery reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies and monetary easing that further uplifts the economic outlook. This outlook is further supported by the ongoing vaccinations, which is expected to pick up in the second half of 2021. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021, from a contraction of 3.3% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, close to home, due to improved exports and commodity prices, economic growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021, from a contraction of 1.9% in 2020. This growth will also be supported by recovery in both private consumption and investment as the economies reopen. Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the world, our economy was not spared from the adverse impact of the pandemic. In addition, the Kenyan economy experienced two other shocks. One, the invasion of the desert locusts that damaged crops, and two, floods that caused loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Given the impact of these shocks, economic growth for 2020 declined to 0.6% from 5.4% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is expected to rebound to 6.6% in 2021. This recovery reflects the lower base of 2020, when most services sectors were adversely affected by the closure of the economy, recording negative growth. The outlook in 2021 will be reinforced by the prevailing stable macroeconomic environment and the ongoing implementation of the strategic priorities of government under the Big Four agenda and economic recovery strategy. Weather conditions are expected to be favorable, supporting agricultural output. As a result, Export of goods and services will expand as global demand normalizes. Over the medium term, the economy is expected to remain resilient and grow at a rate above 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, this growth outlook is affirmed by the recent surveys by the Monetary Policy Committee, revealing a general optimism about economic growth prospects. In addition, the recent IMF mission to Kenya noted that economic recovery is underway and estimates economic growth consistent with our projections. Mr. Speaker, to support this growth outlook, we shall continue to maintain macroeconomic stability. Inflation, which stood at 5.9% in May 2021, is expected to remain within the target range of 5%, with a margin of 2.5 on either side, supported by prudent fiscal and monetary policies. Interest rates will be expected to remain low and stable, supporting growth of private sector credit. The balance of payments is also expected to be strong, with the current account balance projected to remain at 5.2% of GDP. Further, the rebound in horticulture and tea exports, as well as increased inflows of remittances, will support build-up of adequate levels of official foreign exchange reserves, creating buffers against short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Speaker, the aforementioned economic outlook may be affected by emerging domestic and external risks. To monitor these developments and take appropriate policy interventions to safeguard the economy where the risks to materialize. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, we have carefully reflected on a theme that will resonate with our strategies to protect lives and livelihoods during this period of COVID-19, cushion the vulnerable, and support economic recovery for employment creation and poverty reduction. In this respect, we have framed the theme for this budget as building back better, a strategy for resilient and sustainable economic recovery and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section of my statement will give highlights of the policy priorities of the government and the strategy for economic recovery. I will later provide highlights of the fiscal framework underpinning the budget, spending priorities, and the proposed tax policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of Big Four agenda remains a high priority and critical to the economic recovery. In this regard, the government will fast-track implementation of programs and projects under the Big Four agenda to enhance food and nutritional security, achieve universal health care, provide affordable housing, and support growth of manufacturing sector for job creation. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to achieve a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. First, maintain a macroeconomic stability and enhance security to foster secure and conducive business environment and security of Kenyans and their properties. Second, scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country such as roads, rail, energy, and water to reduce the cost of doing business, movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, stimulating tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. Fourth, expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. Fifth, support the youth, women, and persons living with disability through government-funded empowerment programs that leverages on partnerships with the private sector organization. Sixth, support county government through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. And lastly, implement various policy, legal, and institutional reforms to enhance efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, following the outbreak of the pandemic, we implemented the economic stimulus program to support economic activities and mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on Kenyans and businesses. The achievement of the program includes: 1, creation of over 100,000 jobs opportunities for the youth under the Kazi Mtani initiative, and 5,500 community scouts in wildlife conservation areas across the 47 counties. 2, improvement of education outcomes through construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools, procurement of locally fabricated desks for both primary and secondary schools, and recruitment of 4,000 and 8,000 primary and secondary school intern teachers, respectively. 3, enhancement of healthcare system capacity by recruiting 5,000 diploma and certificate level healthcare workers for 1 year under the universal health coverage. 4, enhancement of liquidity to businesses through payment of VAT refunds of shilling 10 billion and clearance of pending bills of shilling 13.1 billion. 5, de-risking of lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises by providing shilling 3 billion to the credit guarantee scheme as a seed capital. And 6, cushioning the vulnerable, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, with an additional shilling 10 billion to the cash transfer program. Mr. Speaker, building on the success of the aforementioned interventions, the government is now set to implement an elaborate economic recovery strategy that aims to reposition the economy on an inclusive and sustainable growth trajectory. The strategy seeks to enhance resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs from diverse sources, including public-private partnership and lease financing. The strategy will also support the role of the private sector in the economy and further facilitate credit access by micro, small, and medium enterprises through the credit guarantee scheme. Under the strategy, the government will upscale investment in ICT and digital infrastructure in order to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. The government shall also promote local production processes and domestic supply value chains and strengthen social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly, successful implementation of this strategy will enable us to realize the aspired economic growth, create employment, and narrow income inequalities. I will later in this statement propose budget allocations to the government priority areas. Mr. Speaker, besides the achievements under the economic stimulus program, the ongoing key strategic interventions of government as well as sustained policy reforms over the years have greatly transformed the economy and improved the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight some of the key achievements realized from these investments and reforms. Mr. Speaker, at the macroeconomic level, our prudent fiscal, monetary, and financial policies have resulted into fast, strong economic growth that averaged at 5.6% between 2013 and 2019. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed growth in the year 2020. The GDP per capita increased by an impressive 80.4% from shilling 113,000 in 2013 to shilling 204,000 in 2019. New jobs created by both the formal and the informal sector increased by 12% from 755,000 in 2013 to 846,000 in 2019. Second, inflation rate has remained within target range, averaging 6.1%. Third, interest rates have declined while credit to the private sector increased. Lending rates declined from 17.3% in 2013 to 12% in 2020, while the central bank rate declined from 8.5% in 2013 to 7% in 2020. As a result, credit to the private sector increased from shilling 1.5 trillion in 2013 to shilling 2.8 trillion in 2020. Fourth, the current account deficit improved from 8.8% of GDP in 2013 to 4.7% of GDP in 2020, supporting the stability of the foreign exchange market. And fifth, revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, doubled from shilling 900 billion in the financial 2013-2014 to an estimated shilling 1.8 trillion in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, our investment in the expansion of road networks, railways, seaports, airports, and energy has enhanced domestic and regional connectivity, boosted rural productivity, and reduced urban congestion. These investments include: 1, the standard gauge railway and the urban commuter rail in Nairobi, the ongoing rehabilitation of meter gauge railway lines along various routes, including Nairobi-Nanyuki and Nakuru-Kisumu-Butere. 2, the recently launched first batch in Lamu Port as a critical pillar of the LAPSSET corridor. Our focus to make Lamu a free port for both domestic and transshipment purposes. In addition, the government is establishing a disease-free zone in Lamu to support export of live animals and processed meat. 3, the rehabilitation and subsequent use of Kisumu Port will enhance efficiency in regional trade. And 4, expansion in energy generation and connectivity with over 7.5 million households today connected to electricity compared to 2.3 million households in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has provided various incentives at our ports, including exempting the fuel supply to the shipping lines from import and excise duty, VAT, as well as railway development levy and import declaration fees. To further attract more ships to our ports, particularly to the recently launched Lamu Port, the government will review the arrangements on fueling by vessels calling at the Kenyan ports, with a view to allowing ship-to-ship refueling and establishment of fuel bunker facilities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the various reforms in the agricultural sector, we focus on the livestock sector by reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. We shall set up a meat processing plant in Lamu to provide ready market for livestock, increase income to farmers, and enhance the meat value chain. Mr. Speaker, we also focused on increasing fish production by refurbishing Liwatoni Fishing Complex and setting up a new fish processing plant in Lamu. This will promote exports and increase income for the local fishermen. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve access to land as a factor for development, we have stepped up investment in the sector and rolled out ambitious national program of land titling and digitization of land records. Mr. Speaker, tea and coffee subsectors provide livelihoods to millions of Kenyans. Despite its contribution, the foreign exchange earnings, the returns to farmers have been declining due to low productivity, high input cost, low levels of value addition, and weak regulatory and institutional framework. Under the ongoing reforms in the coffee and tea sectors, I'll be proposing further measures to enhance competitiveness of these subsectors. With regard to manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, the government has revived and transformed textile, leather, and automobile industries, which have in turn created jobs for our youth. The full operationalization of special economic zones in Dongokundu, Naivasha, and Kisumu will support local industries, industrial activities, and unlock additional employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has supported local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles by providing various tax incentives. This includes removal of excise duty on locally assembled motor vehicles, duty-free importation of complete knockdown kits, and reduced corporate tax from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years of operation. I am pleased to note that the industry has responded positively to these interventions, and to date, we have approved 13 motor vehicle and 17 motorcycle assemblers. These local assemblers have created employment opportunities while also saving the country substantial foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, whereas assembly of commercial vehicles have registered tremendous growth, the passenger category of motor vehicles remains underdeveloped. This category is still dominated by imported used vehicles, comprising over 70% of passenger vehicles, which is largely attributed to the high cost of assembly. In this regard, the government is working on a framework to support the assembly of affordable passenger vehicles. Further, the government, in consultation with the stakeholders, is in the final stages of instituting comprehensive policy and administrative reforms to fully entrench local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, while we have made tremendous progress as a nation, we remain alive to the structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development, aware that a resilient and sustainable economic recovery is indeed predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms. I propose the following interventions to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen accountability and transparency in public finance management. On procurement, Mr. Speaker, this House approved the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulation 2020 that came into effect in July 2020. With this regulation, it's now easier for procuring entities to meet the specified requirements of bilateral and multilateral agreements on technology and knowledge transfer, local content, and employment quotas, among others. For smooth implementation of the regulations, we have conducted capacity building in all 47 counties. I therefore direct procuring entities to fully comply with these regulations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure efficiency in procurement process and facilitate access by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has reviewed consolidation policy on procurement of ICT equipment and related services. In this regard, procurement of ICT equipment and related services will be decentralized to various ministries, departments, and agencies with effect from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, last year, we began the process of automating public procurement through an end-to-end electronic procurement system. So far, we have developed an implementation strategy that re-engineers all public procurement processes, including functional and technical requirements. In order to actualize this initiative, 31st December 2021 will be the final date for rolling out the electronic government procurement system and therefore discontinuation of the manual procurement processes. In this regard, the government will realize savings as a result of greater efficiency, reduce operational costs, enhance transparency and accountability through increased bidding participation. Mr. Speaker, to support our local contractors and undertake construction of infrastructure projects, we have proposed changes to the contracting framework through the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Bill 2020. The bill before this House proposes, among others, to allow award of contract to multiple bidders. This indeed will support local firms and accelerate the delivery of services. Mr. Speaker, given the prevailing business environment due to the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there's an urgent need to evaluate the financial position and governance of key state corporations and institutions. It is in this respect that the government is exploring targeted reforms to strengthen these institutions, including public universities. Mr. Speaker, in the interim, the government provided financial support to strategic institutions, including Kenya Airways, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, and Postal Corporations of Kenya, which were indeed in dire need of cash to meet critical obligations. Mr. Speaker, we have developed a robust information management system to strengthen the statutory role of the National Treasury in financial and operational oversight, as well as the financial risk analysis for state corporations. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the government introduced cost sharing in public universities in the year 1991. At that time, government funding to public universities per year was set at Kenya shilling 120,000 per student. Of this, government capitation per student was Kenya shilling 70,000, while students contributed Kenya shilling 50,000 through loan funding from Higher Education Loans Board, out of which Kenya shilling 16,000 catered for tuition fees. This is less than half of tuition fees paid currently by students in various colleges of technical and vocational education and training institutions. The ideal cost of training a student in a university has increased from Kenya shilling 120,000 to about Kenya shilling 200,000 per year, and therefore the prevailing funding arrangement introduced in 1991 is unsustainable. Under the current arrangement, universities have not only experienced financial constraints, but have also been unable to continuously honor their statutory obligations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure sustainability and self-reliance of public universities, the Ministry of Education is expected to engage stakeholders beginning July 2021 with a view to addressing this matter. Mr. Speaker, delays in payment of pending bills to businesses who provide services to both national and county government has affected liquidity and operation of these entities. In a number of cases, this has led to closure of businesses and affected livelihoods of the suppliers. Though progress was made in settlement of these bills by the national government, we still have challenges with the county government that still owe various suppliers huge amounts. In this regard, I direct government ministries, departments and agencies and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to support our efforts towards enforcing compliance in payment of all verified pending bills by the county governments by backing our proposal under Article 225 of the Constitution of Kenya to temporarily stop transfers to county governments that persistently fail to comply with the directive to clear pending bills. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector has remained stable and continued to make significant contributions to the economic growth. Our commercial banks continue to expand their businesses to the neighboring markets, including recent acquisitions in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Uganda. The continued regional expansion will leverage on the trade and investment opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Kenyan banking sector continued on its transformation journey that commenced 5 years ago, where the key pillar of the journey has been the strengthening of banks' business models, governance frameworks, and entrenching customer centricity in the operations. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, the banking sector moved quickly to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on staff, customers, and the public and instituted emergency measures to support business continuity, use of digital channels to mitigate COVID-19 infection risk, enhance liquidity to businesses, as well as facilitate compliance with health and safety protocols. As a result, banks continue to provide uninterrupted banking services to customers mainly through digital channels. Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year, more than 54% of the bank loans, equivalent to Kenyan shillings 1.7 trillion, were restructured to enable borrowers navigate through the hard time due to the pandemic. As we move to the recovery phase, the banking sector will be expected to play a pivotal role in supporting the recovery of enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic recovery, additional capital investments are required. In this regard, the recently established Nairobi International Financial Center Authority will play an important role and is expected to publish before end of December 2021 a framework for attracting investments and innovative financial services into our economy and the region. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of mortgages, land acquisition, and housing unit has limited access to affordable housing. Nevertheless, government interventions are beginning to yield the desired results for affordable housing. Significant progress has been made to enhance efficiency, transparency, and certainty in land matters by re-engineering the land registration processes, digitization of land records, and implementation of the Sectional Properties Act. The government is also in the process of streamlining and simplifying the legal and regulatory process governing the housing sector and providing basic infrastructure services to developers. Further, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is supporting the growth of residential housing market in Kenya by providing long-term funding to the mortgage lenders in order to increase affordability of mortgage loans to Kenyans. As of December 2020, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company had refinanced 1,400 affordable housing loans worth Kenya shilling 2.75 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is scheduled to issue an infrastructure bond by October 2021 to raise additional financing for its affordable housing finance objective. Consequently, the company plans to issue green bonds to finance climate-friendly housing projects. Mr. Speaker, during the current financial year, the government operationalized the credit guarantee scheme by providing seed capital of shilling 3 billion to de-risk lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. To this effect, the National Treasury signed credit guarantee agreements with 7 commercial banks who have now rolled out credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to further promote access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has committed to progressively raise the capital to Kenyan shilling 10 billion. In this budget, I propose to allocate an additional Kenyan shilling 2 billion to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, alongside the credit guarantee scheme, on account of improved business environment, the private sector has rolled out other innovative credit products targeting micro, small, and medium enterprises. Through these innovations, the banking sector had disbursed over shilling 20.8 billion to micro, small, and medium enterprises, equivalent to 0.7% of total gross loans by end of April 2021. Mr. Speaker, in order to unlock the full potential of digital lenders, the government has, through the Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Bill 2021, proposed to provide for licensing of digital credit service providers. This bill has been submitted to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a critical role of channeling national savings and foreign capital inflows into the productive sectors. In order to enhance inclusivity and access to investment opportunities in the capital markets, I propose to amend the Central Depository Act to allow for opening of omnibus investment accounts by persons investing on behalf of others in the securities market. This will allow investment by individuals as well as collective investment by groups. Further, to improve efficiency in our capital markets and ensure fair administrative actions by the Capital Markets Authority, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to enable the Capital Markets Tribunal to hear and determine any appeal within 90 days. Mr. Speaker, following the Kenya Bankers Association and other industry players, we shall establish an electronic over-the-counter secondary market platform for government securities. This platform will help in deepening our domestic debt market, improve pricing efficiency and transparency in securities trading, thereby lowering yields and cost of credit in the economy. We expect the operations of the over-the-counter to be in place by June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the defined benefit pension scheme for civil servants, teachers, and disciplined forces has constrained growth of pension savings and also exerted fiscal pressure on government. In order to address these twin problems, the government on 1st of January 2021 rolled out the much-awaited public service superannuation scheme that covers civil servants, teachers, and the disciplined forces aged below 45 years at the commencement of the scheme, with an option for those over 45 years to join if they elect to do so. As of April 2021, a total of 340,318 public servants had indeed joined the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the processing of payment of pension benefits to retired public servants has neither been efficient nor timely, thus denying senior citizens regular incomes. To address this, National Treasury has carried out targeted reforms, including systems reengineering and the provision of real-time pension services in all the Huduma centers countrywide. I am pleased to note that as a result of these interventions, the cumulative pension payments and pension file process increased by 40% by 31st May 2021 compared to the previous year. We expect further improvement with the planned implementation of pensions management information system late in the year. Mr. Speaker, given the disparities in the design of the various existing pension schemes and the attendant laws, it has become necessary that these laws be harmonized, hence the need for establishment of one national retirement policy. The policy currently under development seeks to achieve comprehensive pension coverage across formal and informal sectors so as to protect the interests of beneficiaries and rights of pension contributors. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I shall be publishing the policy by December 2021. Mr. Speaker, further, to enhance good governance and improve accountability and transparency in the management of retirement benefit schemes, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for the registration and regulation of corporate trustees that provide services to pension schemes. Mr. Speaker, our retired citizens have continued to experience challenges in accessing Medicare. For this reason, we have developed post-retirement medical regulations to allow members to make additional voluntary contributions to a medical fund. This will enable retirees access the funds at the retirement or transfer a portion of it to a medical insurance provider. However, the existing regulations exclude post-retirement medical funds established under irrevocable trust by employers and service providers outside the retirement benefit scheme, popularly known as the standalone post-retirement medical funds. These funds have remained unregulated, thus adversely exposing members' funds. As such, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for regulation of these funds. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans in the informal sector are not covered by any pension scheme, making them vulnerable during old age. To address this, I undertook last year to establish a national informal sector pension scheme with a sustainable model that combines long-term savings with short-term needs, targeting the more than 15 million in the informal sector workers who have been excluded from the current pension arrangement. To this effect, I wish to report that necessary instruments to operationalize the scheme, including trust deeds and rules, business plan, and investment policy, have been prepared. We intend to roll out this scheme in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, to reinforce realization of affordable housing, last year, we amended the Retirement Benefits Act and mortgage regulations to allow members to use part of their accumulated benefits to purchase residential houses. This will support members of retirement benefit schemes to own homes. In this budget, I propose to amend the mortgage regulations to allow members to utilize up to 40% or maximum of Ksh3.7 million of their accrued benefits to purchase a house under tenant purchase basis by their pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, currently, foreign insurance brokers are excluded from the definition of brokers under the Insurance Act, thereby making them operate in the country without any controls, thus putting insurance and policyholders at risk. To address this, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the regulation of foreign insurance brokers. Mr. Speaker, classes of long-term insurance business were amended in 2009 to align with modern classification and bring into perspective the industry's current size. However, the permitted maximum management expenditure was not updated to match the new classification, which causes insurance to either overestimate or underestimate the management expenses, impacting negatively on policyholders. I therefore propose to amend the insurance regulations to provide for the maximum permitted expenditure for each category. Mr. Speaker, to effectively manage disaster response in a more coordinated manner, the government has developed a Disaster Risk Management Bill 2021. The objective of the bill is to better prepare and coordinate our disaster response, mitigation and recovery, as well as build resilience at both national and county levels. Given the urgency to provide a framework for disaster management at both levels of government, I appeal to this House to prioritize consideration of this bill. Mr. Speaker, climate change remains a key concern globally, given its adverse impact on economies. In this regard, government will strengthen capacity of national and county governments to plan, budget, implement, and monitor climate resilience investment. The government has partnered with development partners in the implementation of the proposed financing locally led climate action program and already mobilized funding of Ksh3.18 billion to support the initiative over the next 5 years. Through this program, we shall strengthen national and county government capacities to manage climate risk through support to the county climate change units, establishment of county climate change fund, and development of climate change laws. Mr. Speaker, the government has also developed and approved the Sovereign Green Bond Framework, identified a portfolio of projects for consideration under the framework, and is prepared to issue the first sovereign green bond to raise capital to finance green projects under the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, as part of ease of doing business reforms to facilitate trade, we have finalized the development of maritime single window system under the TradeNet system. This will provide an harmonized and simplified ship-to-shore clearance procedures to maritime stakeholders. The maritime single window system will allow shipping agents in Kenya to electronically submit vessel pre-arrival and pre-departure declarations to government agencies. The maritime single window system is expected to replace the current system that is manual, decentralized, with unnecessary lengthy processes that affect the ship turnaround time and increase cost of port to Mombasa. I am pleased to know that this maritime single window system went live on 2nd June 2021. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal policy supporting the financial year 2021-22 and the medium-term budget is designed to support economic recovery and reduce fiscal deficit. The policy aims to mobilize revenues through the ongoing reforms in tax policy and administration. On the expenditure side, the focus will be to rationalize non-priority expenditures from the budget and align the resources to the Big Four agenda and the economic recovery strategy. Mr. Speaker, the execution of this budget for the financial 2020-21, the execution of the budget for the financial 2020-21 has progressed well, albeit with revenue underperformance and elevated expenditure associated with the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The shortfalls in revenues reflect weaker business environment and the impact of containment measures adopted in March 2020 following the outbreak of the pandemic. The government then responded to the pandemic by, among others, implementing tax relief measures in April 2020. These measures resulted in reduced collection of revenues, adversely impacting the implementation of the budget. Arising from this, the government in January 2021 made reversal of some of the relief measures, resulting in improvement in revenue collection. However, in March 2021, containment measures were introduced as a result of the third wave of the COVID-19. These measures lasted for only 1 month. Mr. Speaker, we remain committed to reducing the level of tax exemptions to create parity of treatment while also raising more revenues to fund social programs and reduce the fiscal deficit. In this budget, I will be proposing selected measures to expand the revenue base. Mr. Speaker, our tax policies are spread across various tax statutes, which are amended every year during the budget process, creating uncertainty in tax legislation. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I have initiated a process of developing a national tax policy framework that will not only enhance administrative efficiency of the tax system, but provide consistency and certainty in tax administration and management of tax expenditure. A draft national tax policy is now ready and will be shared with stakeholders and members of the public in line with the dictates of our Constitution before forwarding to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, total revenue including appropriation in aid and grants for the financial 2021-22 budget is projected at Kenya shilling 2.1 trillion, equivalent to 17% of GDP. Of this, total revenue is projected at Kenya shilling 2.04 trillion, equivalent to 16% of GDP, an increase in nominal terms from Kenya shilling 1.84 trillion in the financial year 2020-21. Ordinary revenue in the budget is projected at Kenya shilling 1.78 trillion, equivalent to 14.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure in the financial year 2021-22 budget are projected at Kenya shilling 3.03 trillion, equivalent to 24.5% of GDP, from Kenya shilling 2.89 trillion, equivalent to 25.8% of GDP in the financial 2020-21 budget. Recurrent expenditure will amount to Kenya shilling 2 trillion or 16.2% of GDP. On the other hand, development expenditures, including foreign finance projects, allocations to contingency fund, and conditional transfers to county government are projected at Kenya shilling 669.6 billion. This funding is expected to accelerate completion of ongoing critical infrastructure projects in the country. Mr. Speaker, the expenditures I've outlined in this budget are consistent with those approved in the 2021 budget policy statement. Given the performance of revenue and the available levels of funding from our development partners, it is indeed necessary that we strictly adhere to the expenditure ceilings as presented so as to manage and stabilize public debt. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenues and grants against the projected expenditure, the fiscal deficit for the financial year 2021-22 budget is projected at Kenyan shilling 929.7 billion, equivalent to 7.5% of GDP. This fiscal deficit is lower than Kenyan shilling 976.2 billion, equivalent to 8.7% of GDP in the financial year 2020-21 budget. The fiscal deficit in 2021-22 budget will be financed through net external financing of Kenyan shilling 271.2 billion, equivalent to 2.2% of GDP, and net domestic financing of Kenyan shilling 658.5 billion, equivalent to 5.3% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, our medium-term consolidation policy aims at reducing fiscal deficit progressively to Kenyan shilling 613.8 billion, equivalent to 3.6% of GDP by the year 2024-25. In this respect, we shall closely monitor the impact of COVID-19 to the economy and accordingly adjust the fiscal plan, including tax measures, to ensure that our development agenda remains sustainably funded. We shall carefully do this while limiting in-house adjustments of the budget for new projects except those of emergency nature. This will enhance certainty in the budget process and improve implementation of government programs and projects while adhering to the fiscal consolidation plan. Mr. Speaker, Kenya's public debt remains sustainable, but the debt carrying capacity has, however, declined. Financing of the fiscal deficit will continue to be strictly guided by the debt and borrowing policy and the annual medium-term debt strategy. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing reforms to strengthen the institutional arrangements of public debt management by aligning the operations of the Public Debt Management Office to the PFM Act. In this respect, decisions of the day-to-day management and operations of the public debt management shall be undertaken by the Public Debt Management Office to enhance efficiency, strengthen accountability, and transparency. In addition, Mr. Speaker, during this calendar year, we have scheduled a set of debt management operations to lower costs and risk in our public debt portfolio to improve on the country's debt sustainability indicators and sovereign credit rating. I look forward to support of the August House for the amendment of public debt ceiling set in the Public Finance Management Act to enable implementation of debt management operations, including financing of the fiscal deficit. Mr. Speaker, with the desire to meet our development objectives, the gap between development needs and available resources has been expanding, underscoring the need for alternative financing mechanism. Last year, I highlighted the importance of public-private partnership as an option for closing the financing gap. The current Public-Private Partnership Act impairs expeditious financial closure of public-private partnership projects. To this effect, I undertook to transform the public-private partnership framework, which included review of legal, operational, and institutional structures. In this regard, I submitted the Public-Private Partnership Bill 2021 to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the highlights of the government spending priorities in the coming financial year. In light of the revenue challenges and significant expenditure demands, spending in the financial year 2021-22 will focus on critical areas with the highest impact on the well-being of Kenyans and support economic recovery. Therefore, the total program spending for the financial year 2021-22, excluding redemptions, amounts to shilling 3.03 trillion. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue with the implementation of the economic stimulus program in the financial year 2021-22. With targets to push on vulnerable citizens and businesses, particularly those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have in this regard set aside shilling 23.1 billion in the financial 2021-22 budget for continuation of this program. Mr. Speaker, out of this, shilling 3 billion is earmarked for youth empowerment and employment creation under the Kazi Mtani program. Shilling 2.6 billion will go towards enhancing liquidity to businesses. Shilling 6.4 billion for improving educational outcomes. Shilling 6.9 billion for improving environment, water and sanitation facilities. Shilling 1.97 billion for improving agriculture and food security, as well as shilling 1.2 billion for recruitment of health workers. Mr. Speaker, I have also set aside shilling 1 billion for Kenya Wildlife Services to employ community scouts. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of priority programs under the Big Four agenda is a critical part to supporting sustainable economic recovery and accelerating employment creation. To realize this, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 142.1 billion to support the implementation of the Big Four agenda for both drivers and enabler projects. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak and rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated an urgent need to upscale implementation of universal health coverage to all our counties. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 121.1 billion to the health sector to support the various programs aimed at improving health outcomes. Mr. Speaker, of this amount, shilling 47.7 billion will fund activities and programs for the attainment of universal health coverage. Mr. Speaker, specific allocations for the various activities and programs includes shilling 8.7 billion for the Kenya COVID-19 Emergency Response Project, shilling 4.1 billion for free maternity health care, shilling 7.2 billion for the managed equipment services, as well as shilling 1.8 billion to provide medical cover for the elderly and severely disabled persons in our society. To lower cases of HIV, AIDS, and malaria and tuberculosis in the country, shilling 5.8 billion has been set aside. To enhance vaccines and immunization program, we've set aside shilling 3.9 billion. Further, Mr. Speaker, we propose an additional shilling 14.3 billion for purchase of COVID-19 vaccines and related expenditure in the course of the financial 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, to enhance early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 450 million for procurement of cyberknife radiotherapy equipment for Kenyatta University Teaching Referral and Research Hospital. A further shilling 350 million has been set aside for the establishment of 2 cancer centers in Meru and Kakamega. Further, to improve health service delivery, shilling 15.2 billion has been set aside for Kenyatta National Hospital, shilling 11.5 billion for the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, shilling 7.3 billion for the Kenya Medical Training Centers, shilling 2.8 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, shilling 1.3 billion for the construction of Kenya National Hospital Bands and Pediatric Centers, shilling 863 million for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and shilling 600 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Center. Mr. Speaker, affordable housing program is a pragmatic approach to addressing the housing problems, especially in the urban centers. To ensure success of this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 13.9 billion for the affordable housing program. The proposed allocation includes shilling 3.5 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for establishment of the company's capital, as well as for own lending to primary mortgage lenders, shilling 8.2 billion for construction of affordable housing units, as well as shilling 500 million for construction of social housing units. Mr. Speaker, to support the Nairobi Metropolitan Services in reversing urban indignity in Nairobi City County, shilling 100 million has been set aside for the Nairobi Metropolitan Service Improvement Project and shilling 111.2 million for construction of footbridges. Other key allocations to the housing, urban development, and public works sector includes shilling 3.5 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 2, shilling 1 billion for construction of markets, shilling 1 billion for maintenance of government pool houses, shilling 750 million for construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya Prison, shilling 700 million for the Kenya Urban Program, shilling 200 million for the Afri-City Summit, and shilling 445.6 million for the construction and completion of salt project buildings. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 700 million to support the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project to offer an efficient and time-saving public transport. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to scale up reforms to encourage investments in the manufacturing sector to support and protect local industries. Despite the challenges brought about by COVID-19 pandemic, the fiscal and monetary policy measures that the government implemented significantly cushioned the sector. Mr. Speaker, to further promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 20.5 billion under the various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of these, shilling 2 billion will go to the credit guarantee scheme to enhance access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises in the manufacturing sector. Shilling 500 million will support development of various micro, small, and medium enterprises in Kenya, and shilling 600 million for provision of finances to micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Kenya Industrial Estate. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside shilling 8.3 billion for Dongokundu Special Economic Zone, shilling 350 million for development of the Special Economic Zone, Textile Park in Naivasha, Kenani Leather Industrial Park, and at the River Textile Hub, shilling 90 million for the Free Port and Industrial Park Special Economic Zone in Mombasa. Other proposed allocations include shilling 130.2 million for the modernization of Rivertex, shilling 800 million for access roads to industrial park facilities. Mr. Speaker, in order to maximize the benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards the revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed 210.4 million for coffee industry revitalization, shilling 59.2 million for modernization of cooperative cotton ginneries, and shilling 50 million for cotton development as a subsidy and extension support. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth and with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 1.4 billion for the Kenya Industrial and Entrepreneurship Project, shilling 800 million for the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, shilling 448 million for industrial research laboratories, shilling 199.5 million for constituency industrial development centers. Mr. Speaker, in order to support our aspirations of attaining 100% food and nutrition security, I have set aside shilling 60 billion to relevant programs in this budget. Out of these, shilling 7 billion will go to the National Agricultural and Rural Inclusivity Project, shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, shilling 1.8 billion has been proposed for the emergency locust response, shilling 1.5 billion for the National Value Chain Support Program, shilling 1.5 billion for the Agricultural Sector Development Support Program 2, shilling 1.5 billion for the Small Scale Irrigation and Value Addition Project, and shilling 620 million for Food Security and Crop Diversification Project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose shilling 3 billion for free disease holding ground in Lamu. I have also proposed shilling 488.1 million for the Regional Pastoral Livelihood Resilience Project, shilling 455 million for the Kenya Livestock Commercialization Program, shilling 163 million for the Livestock Value Chain Support Project, and shilling 156.2 million for livestock production under Big Four initiative. To enhance animal disease controls, I have set aside shilling 180 million for sustainable entrepreneurship free areas in Kenya. Kenya shilling 131.4 million for the disease-free zones program, and Kenya shilling 60 million for modernization of foot and mouth disease laboratory and related activities. Mr. Speaker, the realization of the food and nutrition security also relies heavily on the sustainable utilization of the blue economy resources. To promote this, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 3.2 billion for the aquaculture business development project, Kenya shilling 3.4 billion for Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socio-Economic Development Project, Kenya shilling 2.1 billion for exploitation of living resources under the blue economy, Kenya shilling 1 billion for construction of fish processing plant in Lamu, Kenya shilling 290 million for coastal fisheries infrastructure development, Kenya shilling 326.6 million for rehabilitation of fish landing sites in Lamu in Lake Victoria, Kenya shilling 150 million for aquaculture technology development and innovation transfers, and Kenya shilling 195.3 million for development of blue economy initiatives. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase agricultural productivity and enhance resilience to climate change risk in targeted smallholder farming and pastoral communities in Kenya, I have set aside Kenya shilling 8.9 billion for the Climate Smart Agricultural Productivity Project, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion to enhance drought resilience and sustainable livelihood, Kenya shilling 178 million towards ending drought emergencies in Kenya, and in addition, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 529.5 million for the livestock and crop insurance scheme to reduce the vulnerabilities of Kenyan farmers to disease and natural disasters. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of land ownership, I have set aside Kenya shilling 1.5 billion for processing and registration of title deeds, Kenya shilling 600 million for digitization of land registries, and Kenya shilling 105 million for construction of land registries. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include Kenya shilling 100 million for revitalization of cotton industry, Kenya shilling 300 million for mitigation of fall armyworms, Kenya shilling 150 million for establishment of liquid nitrogen plant, Kenya shilling 200 million towards the embryo transfer project, and Kenya shilling 65 million for construction and refurbishment of the Leather Science Institute. Mr. Speaker, having highlighted the expenditures under the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda Initiative, allow me to turn to other proposed areas of expenditure in this budget that will support our path to sustainable and resilient economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand critical infrastructure in roads, rails, sea and airports to create an enabling environment for economic recovery and employment creation. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 182.5 billion, excluding the provisions I have set aside for the Economic Stimulus Program and the Big Four Agenda, to support construction of roads and bridges, as well as their rehabilitation and maintenance. Mr. Speaker, the rehabilitation of the meter gauge railway has improved interconnectivity and reduced traffic congestion on our roads. To continue improving public transport within the Nairobi metropolitan area, I have set aside Kenya shilling 1.3 billion for railway metro lines. Further, Mr. Speaker, to expand railway transport to the rest of the country, I have set aside Kenya shilling 27.2 billion for phase 2 of the standard gauge railway, Kenya shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Naivasha Inland Container Depot, Malaba, Kenya shilling 2 billion for construction and rehabilitation of Lenana Ngong Railway, Kenya shilling 1.1 billion to complete rehabilitation of the Nairobi-Nanyuki meter gauge railway line, and Kenya shilling 700 million to complete rehabilitation of the Nakuru-Kisumu meter gauge railway. I have also set aside Kenya shilling 2 billion for the Kenya National Shipping Yard. Mr. Speaker, to support development of our ports, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shilling 7.5 billion for the construction of the Mombasa Port Development Project, and Kenya shilling 7.5 billion for the LAPSSET project. Further, I have set aside Kenya shilling 128 million for insurance of ferries for the Likoni Channel, Kenya shilling 149 million for the maintenance of ferries and jetty headquarters, and Kenya shilling 603 million for construction and expansion of airports and airstrips. Mr. Speaker, to support production of reliable and affordable energy, I have set aside a total of shilling 71.9 billion, excluding the provision set aside under the Big Four initiatives. Out of this, shilling 50.1 billion will cater for transmission and distribution of power. Shilling 11.3 billion for development of geothermal energy. Shilling 6.4 billion for electrification of public facilities, and shilling 1.3 billion for development of nuclear energy, as well as exploration and mining of coal. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security will create an enabling environment for business to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. In this regard, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 294.5 billion to support operation of the National Police, Defense, and the National Intelligence Service. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include 119.8 billion for defense, shilling 42.5 billion for the National Intelligence Service, shilling 110.6 billion for policing and prison services, shilling 10.7 billion for leasing of police motor vehicles, and shilling 1 billion for police modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up war on crime and enhance support for administration of justice, I have set aside shilling 1.5 billion for the National Communication Surveillance System and shilling 335 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Mr. Speaker, other allocations include shilling 4.8 billion for medical insurance for the National Police Service and prisons, shilling 2.3 billion for the group personal insurance for the National Police and prisons, as well as shilling 1 billion for the National Integrated Identity Management System. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic last year disrupted in-person learning, leading to closure of schools for 9 months. The government is determined to recover the lost time while ensuring safe learning in our schools, colleges, and universities. In this respect, I have set aside a total of shilling 202.8 billion to support programs in the education sector. Mr. Speaker, out of the proposed allocation, shilling 12 billion will cater for free primary education, shilling 2.5 billion for recruitment of teachers, shilling 62.2 billion for free day secondary education, including insurance under the NHI for secondary school students, shilling 4 billion for examination fee waiver for all class 8 and Form 4 candidates, and shilling 1.8 billion for the school feeding program. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 1 billion for the competency-based curriculum and shilling 420 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 4.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure and shilling 1.8 billion for construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, shilling 1.1 billion has been set aside to increase access and improve the quality of technical and vocational education and training programs under the East African Skills Transformation and Regional Integration Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector includes shilling 281.7 billion to Teacher Service Commission, shilling 76.3 billion for university education, shilling 15.8 billion to the Higher Education Loans Board, shilling 5.8 billion for Kenya Secondary School Education Quality Improvement Project, and shilling 5.2 billion capitation to TVET students. Further, shilling 745 million has been set aside for the technical vocational education training and entrepreneurship, shilling 633 million for promotion of youth employment and vocational training, and shilling 323 million for the National Research Fund. Mr. Speaker, when COVID-19 pandemic struck last year, we injected additional resources to the traditional cash transfer program to cushion the vulnerable in our society. To continue protecting this vulnerable segment, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 37.8 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, shilling 16.7 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, Kenya shilling 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, and Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for orphans, for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation also includes Kenya shilling 4.1 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net program, Kenya shilling 3.7 billion for the Kenya Development Response to Displacement Impact Project, and Kenya shilling 2.7 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, Kenya shilling 933.8 million will go to the Child Welfare Society of Kenya. Kenya shilling 400 million for the presidential Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the hard economic times following the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic. In order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by youth, women, and persons living with disabilities, I have set aside Kenya shilling 10 billion for the National Youth Service, Kenya shilling 2.2 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment and Opportunities Project, Kenya shilling 454.1 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shilling 120 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, and Kenya shilling 62 million for the Youth Employment and Enterprise Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have set aside Kenya shilling 41.7 billion for the Kenya shilling 2.1 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, as well as Kenya shilling 2.8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs in the previously marginalized areas. Mr. Speaker, the rapid technological advancements portend great potential to catalyze economic recovery, create jobs, and improve lives and livelihood for Kenyans. To leverage on these technological gains, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 20.9 billion to fund initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, these allocations include shilling 1 billion for government shared services, shilling 670 million for the digital literacy program. Further, to fast-track the development of the Konza Technopolis City, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 12 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1, shilling 3.6 billion for Konza Data Center and Smart City Facility, shilling 400 million for construction of Konza Complex phase 1B, and shilling 200 million for development of Konza Technopolis Master Plan. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations include shilling 1.2 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of National Optic Fiber Backbone Phase 2 expansion cable, shilling 1.1 billion for installation and commissioning of Eldoret Nadapal fiber optic cable, and shilling 463 million for maintenance and rehabilitation of last mile county connectivity network. Mr. Speaker, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing containment measures significantly affected tourism, sports, culture, and arts sectors. To support recovery of these sectors, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 15 billion for the Sports, Arts, and Social Development Fund, shilling 1.7 billion for the Tourism Fund, shilling 643 million for the Tourism Promotion Fund, and shilling 90 million for refurbishment of the regional stadia. Mr. Speaker, to expand access to clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I have proposed an allocation of shilling 38 billion for water and sewerage infrastructure development, shilling 16.4 billion for water resource management, and shilling 10.8 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have set aside shilling 10.5 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, and shilling 1.6 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation, I have set aside shilling 9.6 billion for forest and water towers conservation, shilling 3.3 billion for environment management and protection, Kenya shilling 1.4 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shilling 8.2 billion for wildlife conservation and management. Mr. Speaker, to enhance good governance and scale up fight against corruption, I have set aside Kenya shilling 3.3 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya shilling 3.2 billion for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and Kenya shilling 7.6 billion for the Criminal Investigation Services, and Kenya shilling 5.9 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the oversight and legislative role of Parliament and access to justice, I propose to set aside Kenya shilling 37.9 billion for Parliament and Kenya shilling 17.9 billion for the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, acknowledging the place of devolution in our country, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 370 billion as equitable share, representing 27.3% of the most recent audited and approved revenue raised nationally, in line with Article 2032 of the Constitution. In addition, the county governments will receive Kenya shilling 7.5 billion as conditional allocation from the national government share of revenue, and Kenya shilling 32.3 billion from development partners, bringing the total allocation to the county government for the financial year 2021-22 to Kenya shilling 409.9 billion. Indeed, this marks a substantial increase compared to Kenya shilling 353.2 billion allocation in the financial year 2020-21, a clear testimony of the government's commitment to supporting devolution. Mr. Speaker, in line with the High Court ruling on petition number 252 of 2016, directing that conditional and unconditional grants to county government should not be provided for under the Division of Revenue Act, the National Treasury is in consultation with other stakeholders is developing an appropriate legal instrument to be used to disburse additional conditional grants from the national government's share of revenue, as well as from proceeds of loans and grants to county governments. Mr. Speaker, in February 2020, the national government and the national city county government entered into a mutual agreement in line with Article 187 of the Constitution, through which the Nairobi City County transferred some of its functions to the national government. To ensure that the process of such a transfer of functions is fully reinforced in law, the National Treasury is developing a legislation to operationalize Articles 187 and 189 of the Constitution on transfer of functions and cooperation between the national and county governments. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate performance of the transferred functions by the Nairobi Metropolitan Services, I propose to allocate Kenya shilling 27.2 billion, which will comprise 18 billion for recurrent expenditure and Kenya shilling 9.2 billion for development expenditure. Mr. Speaker, to support county governments' capacities to enhance their own source revenue and reduce our reliance on equitable share, the National Treasury rolled out a nationwide capacity building exercise for county governments on interventions contained in the national policy to support enhancement of county government own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, the policy proposes broadening of the revenue basis while enhancing counties' revenue administrative capacities. The policy further proposes legal framework to ensure that the county governments comply with Article 209(5) of the Constitution of Kenya when formulating their revenue-raising measures. In this regard, we resubmitted the County Government Revenue-Raising Process Bill 2020 to this House in early 2020 for consideration. It is my hope that this bill will get necessary priority and approval. Further, Mr. Speaker, the government, through a multi-agency task force, has reviewed existing revenue management systems with a view to deploying one integrated county revenue management system for use by all the 47 county governments. The task force has completed its work and made appropriate recommendations for consideration by the two levels of government. Mr. Speaker, in order to provide basic services to the previously marginalized areas, as envisioned under the Constitution of Kenya, the concerned county governments have been allocated Kenya shilling 6.8 billion under the Equalization Fund in the financial year 2021-22. Mr. Speaker, arising from the High Court's ruling declaring the Equalization Fund guidelines unconstitutional, The National Treasury has developed the Public Finance Management Regulations 2021, which is now before this House for consideration. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to taxation policy measures for the financial 2021-22 budget. I will begin by highlighting some of the key measures on custom duty as agreed during the East African Community Partner States pre-budget consultation in May 2021. I will then highlight some of the proposed amendments in the various tax laws relating to tax administration. These amendments are contained in the Finance Bill 2021 that I submitted to this House in April 2021 for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, the custom measures agreed by the East African Community Partner States and the proposed amendments in the Finance Bill 2021 are expected to generate an additional shilling 8.7 billion to the Exchequer for the financial 2021-22 budget. On custom duties, Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget meeting, the ministers noted with concern the proliferation of cheap imports into the region and agreed on measures to protect locally manufactured products from unfair competition. The agreed measures under custom shall become effective from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, to sustain the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, East African partner states have agreed to extend the duty-free importation window for raw materials and inputs for manufacture of masks, sanitizers, ventilators, and personal protective equipment remission for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, over the years, we have developed sufficient capacity for local manufacturing in the metal and allied subsector. This has generated job opportunities for our youth. However, the local manufacturers in this subsector continue to face stiff competition from cheaper imports. In this regard, and in order to continue protecting this subsector, the East African partner states agreed that imported iron and steel products shall continue attracting a duty rate of 25% with the corresponding specific rates for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, our farmers have been working hard to produce enough food to satisfy demand in the region. In particular, the sector has been meeting local demands for vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, and tomatoes, among others. To protect these farmers and the sector from cheap imports, the East African partner states agreed that vegetable products, including potatoes, peas, tomatoes, among others, shall attract a duty rate of 30% for 1 year as we await the finalization of the review of the East African Community Common External Tariff. Mr. Speaker, baby diapers are essential products and there is need to supply them at affordable prices. In this regard, last year we allowed manufacturers to access inputs for manufacture of baby diapers duty-free under duty remission scheme. This was meant to support Kenya's capacity to manufacture these products locally and create jobs. I am happy to note that many companies have responded to these incentives by increasing production. In order to nurture the growth of this industry and to continue sustaining the smiles of our babies, we have agreed to extend the duty-free importation of inputs for manufacture of baby diapers for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient raw material for manufacture of leather and footwear products. In support of this sector, the government has imposed a duty of 25% on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products. However, the sector continues to face competition from imported products due to undervaluation, thereby discouraging investments in the sector. To this effect, and in order to enhance incomes of our farmers, the East African Community Partner States have agreed to retain the import duty on imported products for manufacture of leather and footwear products at 25% and introduce a further specific duty rate to guard against undervaluation. Mr. Speaker, our micro, small, and medium enterprises that operate in the Jokali sector have continued to thrive, creating jobs and incomes to millions of families. Of particular interest is the furniture industry that has continued to attract local artisans who have been able to provide high-quality products. However, the industry continues to face stiff competition for imported finished products sometimes of low quality. In this regard, the East African Community Partner States agreed to extend the applicable import duty on furniture at the rate of 35% for a further 1 year. Mr. Speaker, to give impetus to the affordable housing programs and facilitate availability of locally made roofing tiles at affordable prices, East African Community Partner States agreed to extend for a further 1 year the duty-free window for importing inputs for the manufacture of roofing tiles under the duty remission scheme. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, to ensure equity and fairness in taxation, I have proposed to align the Income Tax Act with international best practice, through which introduction of provisions to prevent tax-based erosion and profit shifting, as well as restrict treaty benefits to curb tax evasion and avoidance. In this respect, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to expand the definition of the term permanent establishment so as to align the Income Tax Act with the international best practice. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act 2020 introduced the digital service tax on income earned through the digital marketplace. However, the current tax provision do not cover all traders who use the digital service platform to transact their business. In this regard, I propose to expand the scope of the digital service tax to include income derived from internet and electronic networks. Further, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to align the rate of withholding tax on service fees in the extractive industry with that withheld in respect of management and professional services under the same sector. This will remove ambiguity and manipulation that result in leakage of tax revenue through characterization of income. Mr. Speaker, the private contribution made to insurance companies enjoy tax relief. However, the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund do not enjoy this relief, despite the fund being the largest medical cover for majority of Kenyans under the universal health care. In order to support the contributors and encourage more non-registered persons to join the fund, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to allow the contribution to the National Health Insurance Fund qualify for tax relief at the rate of 15% of the contributed amount. Mr. Speaker, the Income Tax Act provides for a tax rebate to employers who offer internship to a minimum of 10 university graduates for a period of 1 year. These employers are allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of their apprenticeship emolument. In order to encourage employers to provide similar opportunities for TVET graduates, I propose an amendment to the Income Tax Act to include graduates of TVET institutions under the program. Accordingly, employers who engage a minimum of 10 graduates from both universities and TVET institutions will be allowed to deduct from their taxable income an extra 50% out of the cost of apprenticeship emolument. It is my hope that employers will take advantage of this incentive and give our young graduates from TVET institutions opportunities to gain practical experience so as to expand their employability. Mr. Speaker, last year, we revised the investment allowance regime under the second schedule to include Tax Act to introduce a new regime and retain the reducing balance method of deduction. However, under this method, deduction rarely gets exhausted. In order to cure this problem, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to replace the reducing balance method with the straight line method, which provides definite timeline for the deductions. This will provide certainty in taxation, ease tax administration, and enhance compliance. Mr. Speaker, we have noted that the current provisions in the deductibility of interest allow some taxpayers to manipulate their balance sheets to reduce their tax liabilities. I therefore propose to replace the current thin capitalization rule that is based on debt to equity ratio with interest restrictions based on a ratio of earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Accordingly, Any interest paid in excess of 30% of a company's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization will be disallowed in determination of taxable income. Mr. Speaker, in addition to being an international best practice, these measures has been found to be a better indicator of an economic performance of businesses, hence appropriate for determining the deductibility of interest on loans. This will guard against tax planning. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the proposed amendments under the Value Added Tax Act. In order to strengthen our healthcare system, make the cost of medicines affordable for Kenyans, and step up the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, I propose to introduce VAT exemption on medicament used in our health facilities, including decongestants and food supplements. I propose to provide VAT exemptions to diagnostic and laboratory reagents, artificial respirators, including therapeutic respiration apparatus, breathing appliances, gas masks, as well as medical equipment and technologies used in the provision of medical care services. It is my hope that the suppliers of this medicament and medical equipment will reciprocate by making their prices affordable. Mr. Speaker, in order to promote local manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, I also propose to introduce VAT exemption on inputs used in the manufacture of medical ventilators and breathing appliances. This will enhance access to these products that are essential in management of the COVID-19 complications. Mr. Speaker, despite the huge potential for mineral and petroleum resources in the country, exploration and mining sector remains underdeveloped due to huge capital outlay requirements. In order to promote exploration and mining activities in the country, I propose to exempt from VAT goods for inclusive use in geothermal or oil exploration and mine prospecting. Mr. Speaker, to boost Kenya's effort on green energy, I propose to exempt from VAT equipment for generation of solar and wind energy. Mr. Speaker, to provide a transition clause to allow companies that had already signed power purchase agreements with government, I propose to amend the Value Added Tax Act to provide for a transition for the project that had been signed before April 2020 to enable them continue benefiting from the VAT exemption in respect of taxable goods used in the project. This transition will expire upon completion of the said projects. Mr. Speaker, in order to entrench the benefit of affordable housing, including specialized facilities like the student hostels, it is imperative to develop innovative financing alternatives. In this regard, I propose to exempt from VAT asset transfers in the real estate investment trust and asset-backed securities. This will deepen our capital markets by encouraging investors to participate in the real estate investment trust. Mr. Speaker, as I turn to the proposed amendments to the Excise Duty Act, the Finance Act 2020 removed excise duty on betting. The removal of this tax generated a lot of public debate, considering that betting has become widespread in our society, resulting in negative social effects. In this regard, I propose to reintroduce excise duty on betting at the rate of 20% of the amount wagered. Mr. Speaker, innovations in the tobacco industry has led to introduction of new products such as nicotine pouches. These new products do not fall in the classification of tobacco products existing in the Excise Duty Act and are therefore currently not subject to taxation. In this regard, I propose excise duty on products containing nicotine or nicotine substitutes at a specific rate of shilling 5 per gram. This rate of excise duty is equivalent to the duty applicable to similar products under this Act. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of service industry, particularly e-commerce, I propose to amend the Excise Duty Act so as to provide a rebate on the excise duty paid on internet data by a person who purchases the data in bulk for resale. Mr. Speaker, on the proposals to ease tax administration, Kenya ratified and deposited the multilateral convention for mutual administration assistance in tax matters with the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information on Tax Matters in July 2020. This convention is meant to facilitate automatic exchange of tax information between Kenya Revenue Authority and other jurisdictions. In this regard, I have proposed amendments to the Tax Procedure Act 2015 to facilitate the implementation of the convention. The convention will also enhance tax compliance by foreign taxpayers and act as a deterrent to tax evasion and illicit financial flows. In addition, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to empower the Kenya Revenue Authority seek intervention of other agencies to facilitate compliance with the provisions of the Digital Service Tax. Mr. Speaker, there are various ways that some unpatriotic individuals are using to evade payments of their tax liabilities. For example, we have noted in our iTax system perennial non-compliant taxpayers, defaulters, payment returns without payment, non-filers, nil filers, credit filers, stop filers, and decliners. In addition, there are traders and merchants who are not registered at all for tax purposes. Mr. Speaker, to gather information on tax malpractices, last year, we introduced the iWhistle, a platform that enables members of the public to volunteer information. As at the end of April 2021, the iWhistle platform had received a total of 502 whistles, and we thank the public for volunteering useful information. Considering the complexities and changing dynamics of intelligence gathering and to empower the Kenya Revenue Authority tax malpractices, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Authority Act to increase the maximum reward to a person who provides information leading to the identification of unassessed taxes from Kenya shilling 100,000 to Kenya shilling 500,000. Further, I propose to increase the reward to a person who provides information leading to recovery from maximum of Kenya shilling 2 million to Kenya shilling 5 million. This will encourage receipt of voluntary information to Kenya Revenue Authority, thereby bolstering tax compliance and revenue collections. Mr. Speaker, the Tax Appeals Tribunal has been hearing tax disputes and providing judgments at a very slow pace as the tribunal sits on a part-time basis. This has led to huge backlog of pending cases before the tribunal. Currently, there are 549 pending cases with a revenue implication of shilling 107.4 billion. In order to strengthen the tribunal and allow members to expeditiously hear and conclude cases, I have proposed various amendments to the Act through Tax Appeals Tribunal, Bill 2021, which I have submitted to this House for consideration. I urge the House to prioritize this bill so as to facilitate faster disposal of tax appeals to enable us boost revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, the processing of applications under the ESC duty remission scheme has been manual, time-consuming, and inefficient. In order to improve administration of the scheme, the government automated the process under the single window system and successfully rolled out in September 2020. Mr. Speaker, to strengthen the administration of tax exemptions process for official aid-funded projects, we have embarked on automation of the application and approval under the single window system and target to roll out in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I must state that the preparation of this budget required a lot of balancing. It has not been an easy process, considering the prevailing weak business environment. I am confident that the plans I have laid in this budget will be realized to achieve the envisaged economic recovery that will lead to improvement of the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, it's worthy to note that our President has steered our economy through one of the most difficult periods occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. His leadership and commitment to protection of lives and livelihoods through implementation of a host of measures have not only reduced the fatalities caused by COVID-19, but also supported economic activities. Mr. Speaker, the budget I presented today has articulated additional measures that the government plans to undertake to further boost economic recovery. In light of the challenges in mobilization of additional revenue and rising expenditure demands, spending in the next year's budget will focus on critical areas with the highest impact on the well-being of Kenyans. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I sincerely thank His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta for his wise counsel, unfailing support and guidance, not only during the budget preparation process, but also in the stewardship of the economy. I also thank my fellow cabinet secretaries, the various accounting officers, and staff for their contributions to the financial 2021-22 budget process. Mr. Speaker, I also express deep gratitude to Kenyans for the insightful contributions, proposals, and suggestions that helped us to finalize this budget. In addition, my appreciation also goes to first, the Honorable Speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate, the majority and minority leaders, as well as other leadership of the House and their respective class for overseeing the approval of the budget estimates for the financial 2021-22 and the related documents. Second, to honorable members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, the Planning Committee, and other departmental committees of this House, as well as the staff of the Parliamentary Service Budget Office, for their constructive input during the approval process of the budget. Third, in a very special way, I give tribute to my incredible, selfless team at the National Treasury and Planning who have worked tirelessly for very long hours to ensure that this budget and supporting documents were prepared in time as per their legal requirements. Fourth, the management and staff of Kenya Revenue Authority, Central Bank of Kenya, the Attorney General's Office, Commission of Revenue Allocation, financial sector regulators, and the various agencies under the National Treasury and Planning for their contributions and advice during the budget process. Fifth, our multilateral development partners, especially International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and all other bilateral development partners for their contribution to our development agenda, technical and financial support. Further, I thank the private sector for their resilience and continued contribution to the economic development of this country. Sixth, my appreciation goes to the fourth estate for the active reporting on economic and financial development, as well as engagement on the financial year 2021 and 2022 budget process. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I remain grateful to my family for their unfailing support, regular encouragement, and understanding as I steer my responsibility at the National Treasury and Planning at a critical time like this. I thank you all, and may God bless Kenya. Mr. Speaker, before I resume my seat, you recall in April 2021, I submitted to this House the budget estimates and the Finance Bill 2021, together with accompanying documents as required by the Public Finance Management Act 2012. Today, I further submit the following documents to this August House and request that you graciously receive them. 1. The budget statement for the financial 2021-22. 2. Budget policy statement 2021. Estimates of revenue, grants, and loans for the financial year 2021-22 budget. 4. Financial statement for the financial year 2021-2022 budget. 5. Medium-term debt management strategy 2021. 6th, budget highlights, the Mwananchi guide for the financial year 2021-22. And lastly, statistical annex to the budget statement for the financial year 2021-2022. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, I wish to thank the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning for having made its public pronouncement on the budget highlights and national for the national government for the financial year 2021-2022 and the medium term and the revenue-raising measures. And as you know, now members, today's budget speech will not be accompanied by the usual parliamentary courtesies given the limitations occasioned by the prevailing COVID-19 pandemic and the attendant Ministry of Health's guidelines regarding public meetings. In this regard, upon adjournment of the House and exit of the Speaker's procession from the chamber, all guests are asked to depart the precincts of Parliament at their own pleasure. However, arrangements have been made for a modest press conference by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury at Parliament Gardens. All members may also take the opportunity to address the media on matters pertaining to the budget in the usual manner at the Parliamentary Gardens. Now, honourable members, time being 5 minutes past 5, the House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, 15th of June 2021 at 2:30 p.m.
Well, there you have it. National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani delivering his second national budget address, close to 2 hours. The Treasury navigated around a lot of issues that are open for discussion. He started off with explaining the context of the budget. The Treasury CS noting that the global estimated projected growth of 2021 at 6% has an effect on Kenya's economy. Thus, Kenya's economic rebound expected to be at 6.1%. Yatani in details explaining that the last 1 year has seen a difficult economic time, not just because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but because of the floods that have affected the country and the desert locusts that have ripped apart the country's green forest and areas of plantation. Yatani explained what the government has done in the last 1 year that the country has faced the COVID-19 pandemic and what the government will take as measures to cushion Kenyans, both at a macro level and of the economy. Yatani saying that the government will need to maintain the macroeconomics, scale up infrastructure and complete projects that are halfway or quarterly done. Yatani says the key economic sectors that the government will invest in include agriculture and of course the Big Four agenda that have been given a big chunk. And as far as the allocations are concerned, healthcare, manufacturing, food security, the Big Four, President Uhuru Kenyatta's footprint legacy. The NMS equally has been allocated quite 27.2 billion shillings. The CS noting and directing county government to pay all pending bills by the end of June, by the end of December 2021. The CS also noted that the government has increased the allocation to the stimulus package of the small medium enterprises from 10 billion shillings by an additional 2 billion shillings in the form of a credit guarantee scheme. Earlier on, we were reporting of the estimates of the budget being 3.66 trillion shillings. The Treasury CS final words had the confirmation of the budget and the total expenditure of being 3.03 trillion shillings, of which the government says 2 trillion shillings will go to expenditure, which is recurrent, and it eyes to raise 2.04 trillion shillings in revenue, at least as per the estimated amount. 929.7 billion shillings is the fiscal deficit, of which Treasury CS Ukur Yatani said the government will eye both foreign and domestic borrowing to service that. Development in totality has been given a budget of 669.6 billion shillings. Just a reminder that the total expenditure budget is of 3.03 trillion shillings. The Big Four agenda equally have been allocated quite an amount of money, healthcare being one of them. The manufacturing sector in totality also gets 20.5 billion shillings. Food security, of course, the CS explained the measures that the government will take to secure Kenyans in as far as hunger is concerned. He made mention of allocation to the blue economy and research to that extent. The CS also noted and made reference to the growing number of unemployed youth in the country, and as that there was several allocations, one being to the National Youth Service to the tune of 10 billion shillings. Those are just but take homes from the speech of the National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani, who was making his second budget speech. Remember, he also delivered one last year, quite less, into the tune of 2.9 trillion shillings. This being slightly above that to 3.03 trillion shillings. Quickly, let's get the thoughts of our guest who was us in the studio. Professor Gerisho Nikara has been with us, and Hilary Onami have been with us in studio. Let me get your initial thoughts first. Earlier on, the estimates were of 3.66. The current total expenditure as part of the speech of the National CS is 3.03 trillion shillings. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's clear that the government has listened to complaints and comments about the budgeting process, some of the weaknesses from business groups, and I think the government has made quite a number of proposals which are able to reform these or to create new measures to handle certain problems, and so I think that is basically showing that the government is listening to complaints, and hopefully these will be fully implemented. The government has tended to allay fears that the public debt is getting out of the issue. I think this is the elephant in the room for Kenya for some time, and it may require more, obviously, discussions with the engagement of the public, the media, and all that, so that I think they can all be on the same page. As I said earlier on, I think we need to recognize that debt is almost inevitable in any country, but there are certain things that need to accompany that. They have responded to job creation and saying that job creation they will try to make it more.
All right, Professor, I'll give you a chance to go ahead with your statement, but I understand National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani is currently addressing the media. This is after the presentation of the budget highlights in the Parliament rather. Let's cross over there and listen into what the CS has to say.
Can you just give us clarification on how you're going to fund the big four agenda? Just some clarity on that, bearing in mind that these projects are actually long-term. The second question is, in your first year, you said that you had a goal of addressing the excesses in government, especially looking at the extravagant spending. Do you think you're achieving that, bearing in mind that we still keep on borrowing more, and in terms of achieving our revenue targets, that hasn't been the case? Thank you.
Two more.
My name is Gibbs from K2. Yesterday is the biggest budget in history. Why is it going so up? Whereas we know what the revenue collection has been going down because of the effects of the pandemic. How do you fund the budget? Any other question? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm Haifa from Apple TV. One thing that my concern is how the government is actually going to deal with the issue of the pending bills.
Yeah.
regarding the first question on how to handle the implementation of the Big Four agenda, we've, in our budget, we set forward revenue-raising measures, how to fund government at all expenditure level, whether recurrent, development, and the various sets of development budget. So we presented a balanced budget where the revenue measures amounts to revenue that's going to be equal to the expenditure. And that's where also the Big Four agenda lies. And we are not only looking at the Big Four agenda, but we are looking at in both sustaining the infrastructural projects, whether in roads, rail, seaport, airport. We are going to sustain investment in this area. Additionally, we also keen to continue stepping up the stimulus package that we started this financial year, and we are going to cross over into the next financial year, because we realized labor-based contracts and activities has an instant multiply effect to the economy, because you and me and everybody gets an opportunity to work, earn a living, and support the local economy. Additionally, we're also looking at continuous implementation of the Big Four agenda, because the Big Four agenda was not a one-year event. It's a program that we have planned and budgeted over 3 years, over the medium term. And they are at the moment at the various levels, stages of implementation. And we are confident that by the end of this financial year, we'll have significantly completed most of them. You asked about the expenditure in government. Indeed, it's true that in 2019, we came up with an austerity measures to contain cost for ministries, general government, in certain areas that we think we can still do without, like reduce on the amount on the foreign travels, reduce also on the amount, the allocation, or even domestic travels, or even things like stationaries, things like furniture. We are fully on it. We have not abandoned it, and the austerity measures are already there, and the ministries know it, everyone knows it. And to that extent, we were able to release significant resources for development in targeted development areas. You asked why the budget is high. You couldn't expect more. The budget has to be high because it's based on not only priorities, but the scope of our expenditure. And government is growing, the economy is growing. And a big budget, a growth in budget, has a positive impact on the economic growth, because those are centers of investment, centers of expenditure. And when we expand an investment in the economy, we are likely to realize the intended benefits as a result of creating more jobs and opportunities for our people. If you constrain expenditure, if you are not spending, therefore that multiplier effect will not be felt at all. That's why in this COVID season, given the challenges of the business environment, we believe that government should continue spending more so that it can create that required multiplier effect to the economy. On the issue of pending bills, this is one matter that we feel very sad about it, because Kenyans, business, the private sector, mainly the SMEs, have provided services. They have been provided goods and services to government, whether national or county government, and at the end of the day, they are not paid, or they are not paid in time. This has a negative effect on their own businesses, and subsequently, the economy is going to suffer at their level. In the process, some of them who borrowed money from banks go into challenges of repayment. Some of them, the business are auctioned. They get run into those troubles. That's why we are very keen, and we want to ensure that we maximize on the gains of the policies that we have undertaken to make sure that governments at all levels pay as required. And to that effect, I have proposed change in the law, in the PFM, which we are going to present to Parliament to ask that whether counties or institutions that fail to pay can be held responsible, can be held accountable. Their flow of funds, including the disbursement to those counties that persistently refuse to pay, without any justifiable reason, be provided so that Treasury and suspend some of those disbursements until a clear roadmap and framework are provided in making them comply in payment of pending bills.
How much is pending bills?
It depends. You know, there are pending bills in the ministries, there are pending bills in state corporations, there are also pending bills with the counties substantially. And we are consolidating and making and working on a framework alongside also the Auditor General. We have now commissioned a new audit exercise for the counties so that these bills are verified and then the governors or the counties give us a roadmap on how they are going to settle. Without necessarily, we cannot continue disbursing when the suppliers of those services or goods are not supported through payment of pending bills. Last one.
I'll take you back to the before with the drop in allocations in the past financial year, that is the last financial year and this financial year, compared to that of 2018, between 2018 and 2020, is there a guarantee being the legacy projects of President Uhuru Kenyatta that to be completed by next year when this term comes to an end?
You know, when we plan for projects, we don't necessarily plan for 1 year. Maybe there's heavy budget allocation in the first financial year, and then the subsequent years, because it also depends on the activities that are being undertaken. The fact that the allocation for this year is lower than the first year does not mean that we have abandoned the project. It's only that because these projects are at different phases of implementation. And we are happy with the progress and confident that most of them will be completed in good time. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Just one.
Yeah?
When do you intend to bring proposals to the next current?
You wait for it. I'll let you know.
It's Ukur Yatani's press briefing just minutes after delivering the 2021-2022 budget of the National Assembly, Parliament for that matter. The CS there in that press briefing insisting of the payment of pending bills. Remember, as of March this year, the pending bills amounted to 307.8 billion shillings. Definitely that number has increased. The Treasury CS in his speech on the budget ordered county assemblies and government agencies to craft a framework to pay the pending bills. Quickly, let's bring in guests. Prof, before we crossed over to the press conference by the CS, you said it seems to you as though the government listened to the complaints and the concerns that people were making. How so?
Yeah, actually, in quite a number of areas, they have suggested reforms or amendments to what is going on, indicating that they have heard people's complaints, they have heard business people's complaints, and they are committing themselves to some reforms and strengthening areas which are weak at the moment. And they have said the public in debt issue, for instance, is being addressed, which means that there will be interventions as soon as possible during the budget. And in the case of the youth, they have the CS has said that job creation will be sustained and increased in order to promote economic growth, out of the pandemic. And we also see that he mentioned that so far only 1 million people have been vaccinated in this country. To me, that is a major weakness. We should have tried as much as possible to have reached a much higher number, because that's the only way we are going to stop the number of deaths that are occurring in various parts of the country.
Due to COVID-19, is it?
Due to COVID, yeah.
All right, Prof, let me bring in Hillary for one question as well. Hillary, there seems to be a pattern of an increment in allocation to the Big Four agenda. This seems as though the President knows this is arguably his final full financial year. hence the allocation to these critical areas that he has pointed out as his flagship legacy projects.
Yeah, true, Abdul. Indeed, Big Four has received significant allocations, and as you rightfully put, it was an underpinning statement on his legacy on the medium-term plan 3 that comes to an end in 2022. So Big Four was towards the Vision 2030 realizations, a critical path, and you have seen quite significant allocations to health, to housing, and to manufacturing, to agriculture, and food security, so to speak. So quite a number of significant inputs and allocations and additional allocations have gone into this sector, so as you rightly put here.
And that's indeed very important, because if these Big Four projects are not completed by the time the term of the President Kenyatta comes to an end, it will be a major loss and a waste of resources. So completing those resources, then it means that the country will start enjoying the benefit of the project immediately, and that will actually enhance even the repayment of the money that has been spent on the project.
And Prof, the CS, both in his speech and the later on press conference, insisted on the payment of the pending bills.
That's again very, very crucial. We know that very many businessmen have gotten out of business because they do a project, they implement a project, or reach a certain section which has been agreed, and then they are not paid. And that has accumulated, and that has it has had a very, very negative effect on the business people, especially people who do business with the governments, and especially within the county governments, and even the main government. So I think this is a crucial issue, not only to ensure that projects are completed on time and they are paid for the benefit of both the wananchi, the government, and the contractors.
Hillary, we are talking of credit guarantee scheme as per the speech of the CS of 10 plus 2, 12 billion shillings. Given the unique circumstances of the year ahead, despite the battering of the economy by COVID-19, would this have deserved more allocation?
Exactly, and actually, just to correct you, it's 3 trillion that was allocated, 3 billion that was allocated last year, and is committing an extra 2 trillion towards
2 billion.
Yeah, 2 billion towards the credit guarantee scheme. And he says progressively he anticipates that it will go up to 10 billion to help in credit guarantee scheme. This just to help, as the Prof was saying, inject liquidity to businesses that are either facing credit issue because because of pending bills they are unable to provide the requisite services that are required, or to continue doing business, so to speak. So that credit guarantee scheme comes in handy to support these micro and medium enterprises to bounce back as they expect payment from county governments, from the national government and other entities here.
And I'm talking of the money here, 3.03 total expenditure, of which 2 trillion shillings will go to recurrent expenditure, Hillary.
Yeah, and that is the biggest risk here, because actually, the PFM required principle, it should be 30 to 70%. At least 30% should go into development. And essentially, because 2 trillion, as the CS Yatani was saying, will go towards recurrent expenditure, and that should worry you, that the size of government is increasingly huge. The demands from Parliament, from MCAs and other public sector entities is huge. We cannot afford to continue relying, consuming that much, because we are actually collecting 1.7 through taxes, And when you add in grants and appropriation aid coming to just close to 2 trillion. So basically, whatever we are collecting, we are consuming all of it, which is not really a good sign of financial management.
And just a reminder, the development budget as per the budget speech of the National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani is 669.6 billion shillings. Let's bring in our very own Josh Onsare, who has been covering these, looking at the numbers as well. Josh, to you.
Thank you very much, Abubakar Abdullahi from our studios. We started this exercise very early in the morning, even from this week as it started. And now the CS Treasury, Ukur Yatani, has finished reading the budget. Maybe let's highlight on the key areas on allocation. So far, the Ministry of Treasury has allocated 700 million to support the Nairobi Bus Rapid System. 15.2 billion has been set aside for Kenyatta National Hospital and 14.3 billion to COVID-19 vaccine, and that is to ensure that it helps in combating COVID-19 vaccine. Then another allocation is 142 billion for the Big Four agenda. These are the blueprint projects for President Uhuru Kenyatta, and they are regarded as the ones which are going to be legacy for the president. So they have been allocated 142 billion shillings. And as the CS Ukur Yatani was addressing, he said this was a priority allocation because those are the key projects for President Uhuru Kenyatta. Another allocation is 121 billion shillings for the Ministry of Health, and that is at the national level. For example, you realize that when we talk about health is a devolved unit, the counties also get their equitable share to ensure that the health is running smoothly in the counties. Another allocation that was made is 23.1 billion to cushion Kenyans who have been affected by the COVID-19. Remember, this is the second year since COVID-19 was reported in the country last year, March. So that 21.1 allocation, 23.1 billion allocation is going to cushion Kenyans, that is businesses that were greatly affected. Another allocation is 2.7 billion shillings for the Kenya Serial Enhancement Program to ensure that that program is effective. Another allocation is of 200 million for the 9th Afri-City Summit, which is expected to be held in Kisumu County. Another one is 1 billion for Kenya Wildlife Service, that is to engage the communities or the community scouts so that to ensure that that wildlife conservation is effective. And another allocation is 3 billion for the youth empowerment. That is the program for the youths like Kazi Mtaani. So basically, those are some of the allocations which have been made. And remember, the 2021-2022 budget, it's one of the biggest budgets which have been read in the country of 3.66 trillion shillings. And when this budget was being made, it had a deficit of 952 billion shillings, which means Kenyans are going to dig deeper to ensure that they fund this particular budget. So we will be able to talk to one of the Mheshimiwa to give us our views on the budget. Mheshimiwa, karibu sana uzungumze nasi. Tuambie maoni yako kuhusu bajeti hii ya mwaka 2021-2022.
Asante sana. Bajeti, nashukuru waziri wa fedha kwa kusoma bajeti, lakini mimi kama mbunge wa Matungu kutoka eneo la Western ambapo tunakuza miwa kama our main cash crop, niko disappointed. Hakuna kitu ambacho ninarudi nacho nyumbani, kwa sababu nilikuwa na matarajio kubwa sana kwamba waziri atapeana njia ya kusema kwamba tuna mikakati fulani imewekwa ya kuweza kufufua viwanda za miwa ambazo zimeporomoka kule. Kiwanda ya Mumias iliporomoka, Nzoia haifanyi vizuri, zingine zote ziliporomoka. Na wakulima wako na shida mingi sana. Tuko na shida ya ukosefu wa karo, ukosefu wa ajira, na sisi wote tulikuwa tunategemea miwa. Lakini kwa hii bajeti yote sijaona mipangilio yoyote wala fedha yote ambayo imetengwa kando ya kuweza kusema kwamba haiye inaenda kwa ufufuzi wa sekta ya sukari. Kwa hivyo na pia jambo lingine ni ukiangalia upande wa vijana wengi katika eneo langu la Matungu wanatumia pikipiki kama njia ya kupata pato lao la kila siku. Lakini unapata kwamba katika matarajio ya bajeti ya mwaka huu pikipiki imeongezwa ushuru wa kuileta. Inamaanisha kwamba sasa bei ya pikipiki itaenda juu kuliko vile ilikuwa hapo awali. Na hiyo sasa italeta shida kwamba vijana wengi ambao wangeweza kupata pikipiki ili waweze kutumia kama njia ya kujipatia ajira, watapata sasa ni ugumu because itakuwa ghali zaidi. Ingawaje pia ninaweza kusema pongezi, sio kila kitu ni kibaya. Naweza kusema ni pongezi kwa waziri kwa sababu amesema kwamba sasa wataweza kutengeneza maneno ya kufanya assembling ya motorbikes na vehicles in this country. Na pengine in the long run hiyo itaweza kupeana kazi kwa vijana wengi ambao wamesomea kazi ya ufundi. Lakini kwa yote naona kwamba pia upande wa elimu ya university kumekuwa na kiwango ambacho kimepunguzwa, na ningependa kwamba kiwango cha university ingeongezeka zaidi kuliko kupunguzwa. Na tukiangalia mambo mengine kama ya madeni ya Kenya, mimi ningesema kwamba ingawaje deni ya Kenya iko juu, bajeti yetu hii ndio bajeti kubwa zaidi kuliko bajeti zote. Ninaomba kwamba tuwe waangalifu tunapo kopa. Tusije tukakopa mpaka tukafika kiwango kwamba tunashindwa kumudu kulipa, na inakuwa kwamba ni mzigo kwa nchi kwa miaka zaidi ya 30 ijayo.
Maybe Mheshimiwa, let's look at the common mwananchi. Yes. Maybe what do you think about this budget to the common mwananchi? Is it going to affect the common mwananchi immensely, or it's going to be a smooth kind of a budget for the common mwananchi, considering the bread prices are high at now?
This budget cannot be smooth going for the common mwananchi because most products have been taxed. And of course, paying tax is a responsibility of all citizens. But Kenyans, we are highly taxed. And being highly taxed, it means that the person who is suffering is mwananchi. Mwananchi ndio anapata shida sana when it comes to high taxes. Therefore, as much as it is the biggest budget Kenya has ever seen, but the mwananchi is highly taxed. So mwananchi atapata shida zaidi, considering that we are just recovering, in the process of recovering from the effects of the COVID pandemic. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa, for speaking to TV47. That is Matungu MP Honorable Nabulindo, giving us a highlight on the 2021-2022 budget. So, Abubakar, going forward at our subsequent bulletins, we'll be in a position now to give more details on the 2021-2022 budget. Back to you, Abubakar.
Thank you, Josh Onsare, for that. Just a reminder that the total expenditure as per the 2021-2022 budget is 3.03 trillion shillings, an emphasis that that this is Kenya's biggest budget yet. The very theme of this year's budget is Building Back Better, Strategy for Resilient and Sustainable Economic Growth and Inclusive Growth. As we wind up the discussion here in the studio, a minute each, Prof, the very theme is building back together. If you look at the numbers and where the allocations have been made, is it suggestive? Is it hinting of a build-up?
In some areas it's build-up. In some other areas, maybe remaining more still where it was. Basically, depending on the importance on each of the items. So I would see it's a mixture of build-up and also stability, and in some cases some reduction. We have seen some reductions, and that there must be clear reason why they reduced it. The emphasis given on education and health, I think, is quite strong. And this will be sustained. I think I'm happy to see that they are saying hospitals need to be given great attention, especially in getting equipped. We have seen how people have suffered and died because of poorly equipped hospitals. So I hope many of the governors will take up this seriously and be able to make hospitals a real area, and it's part of one of the universal, one of the big four.
Yes.
So I hope that will be seen in terms of improvement.
And Prof, universal health being one of President Uhuru Kenyatta's lead big four agenda has been allocated 47.7 billion shillings.
Yeah.
Hillary, let me get your closing remarks as well.
Well, thank you so much, Abdul, and it's been quite engaging discussion. And to me, I think building back better, I think we are wait to see, because many promises as a previous budget has been quite significant allocations, yes, and setting aside, I think he has used that word quite a lot. The really is how then do we get the requisite funds to make sure that the priorities as outlined, recovering, building back better is accomplished. I'm glad that going forward, I think employers who employ like 10 graduates have been given a 50% tax rebate. Contracting framework is changing. Initially, contractors were worried that a lot of contracts have been awarded to the foreigners, and we hope that the Buy Kenya Build Kenya policy will be effected, so that we start seeing the trickling effects of building back. A lot of injection to the tourism sector, to the health, and we hope that for once we will love our country better. We will ensure that resources that get to the intended purposes. Because don't forget, 2022 is an electionary year. We have governors who are leaving office. We have some PSS, the CSS who know that maybe this government is ending, and hence it could be their turn to eat. So we need to really put in measures to enhance accountability and making sure that procurement processes, as the CSS put, are tight to seal the corruption loopholes. Because if we don't do that, basically it will be a wish list, so to speak, a budget that will not achieve the intended purposes.
Thank you, Hillary. Hillary Onami is the head of public policy at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. Professor Gerishon Ikiara is an economist, a former lecturer. You said you retired, Prof. Did you?
Yeah, 2019, yes.
All right, after 41 years of teaching economics,
Yes.
Who best to have explained the breakdown of this budget than you, Prof. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. Quickly, let's go through some of the key allocations of the 2022 2021-2022 budget. Let's start with the Big Four agenda of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Food security, 60 billion shillings. Affordable housing, 13.9 billion shillings. Manufacturing, 20.5 billion shillings. Universal health and healthcare has been allocated 47.7 billion shillings. The government has also, through the National Treasury in the budget, has allocated 23.1 billion shillings to economic recovery strategy, 302.1 billion shillings to enhance security for stability, investment and growth. Remember, the budgetary allocation for security had increased by 2 billion shillings owing to the fact that the next financial year rather will be during the elections, and the activities would have started way earlier than that. Infrastructure and investment has been allocated 310.7 billion shillings. 409.8 billion shillings is the amount allocated to the counties. 23 billion shillings is to the information, communication and technology. 103 billion shillings has been allocated to equity, poverty reduction and social protection. 93.2 billion shillings to the environmental management and protection. Well, those are numbers that will, of course, have meaning and significance. And you can join us in our subsequent bulletins for a proper breakdown, where we will have your voice as the viewer as well as the Kenyan you are, the person who Treasury expects to finance this record 3.03 trillion shillings budget. That brings us to the end of our special coverage of the budget 2021-2022 that started right at 11 a.m. ending 5:45 p.m. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. As always, the breakdown will be coming to you in our subsequent bulletins.